It had been precisely 14 days since she, Brad, and Fuzzy McFeatherston had participated in their cake disaster, but it felt like a lifetime ago. They'd had 9 nights together, 9 nights that ranked up there with the best ones of her life, even though they'd hardly done anything. Just eaten together, watched TV, cuddled on the couch, and in her bed. Yes, that fact terrified her. But she was firmly addicted and had just decided to accept her fate. She'd ride this ride to the end, and hopefully, knowing that there would be an end meant that her heart wouldn't hurt so much when Brad decided to flit off. Or her pulse thrummed with possibility. Maybe he'd stay and... Enough. So yes, these last 2 weeks had been wonderful, filled with easy conversation and warm arms. The evening of her creek shenanigans, he'd stayed late, watching bad reality TV and then the various segments from all the late-night shows posted on YouTube that had struck her fancy, before finally slipping out around midnight. He'd pressed a kiss to her forehead, leaving her drowsy and snugly tucked under the covers. And when she'd woken up the following morning, it was to find that he'd prepped her coffee pot to automatically brew and had left a muffin under some plastic wrap on a plate on the counter. Then that night, he'd coaxed her from work to Molly's for dinner. Okay, truthfully, it hadn't taken much coaxing, because Molly's. And while dinner wasn't quite as good as breakfast, because they didn't have the normal amount of freshly made baked goods, it was almost as good. They'd scarfed down hot sandwiches made on freshly made bread, had slurped up steaming soup laden with veggies and plenty of potatoes, and she'd washed down the huge portion with the best pomegranate iced tea she had ever tasted. And then they'd gone back to her place to watch more bad reality TV, though this time it was from her couch and not her bed, and he'd left around midnight again. The following evening, he'd called to say he'd gotten stuck in traffic returning from a beach in Santa Cruz, so they hadn't hung out, hadn't cuddled on the couch, and she'd missed it, which had made her stomach squeeze, her pulse flutter, because she'd known then that she was already hooked on Brad, hooked on the dangerous, dangerous man. But he hadn't seemed to notice her disquiet. Or maybe he had, she realized, remembering the conversation and how he'd drawn her back in with a funny anecdote, how he'd continued to talk with her until she'd relaxed again. Then he'd finagled an invite to her condo the next night. He still hadn't stayed over, and she hadn't asked him to, even though she'd wanted to. He'd just kissed her on the forehead again, then slipped out the front door. And wash, rinse, and repeat. He'd coaxed her to Molly's for breakfast one day before work, saying he just had to try the freshly baked pastries. Another evening, they'd walked hand in hand on the trails behind her house. 2 nights ago, he'd shown up with a big bag of takeout without a word, not long after she had mentioned that work that day had been exhausting. And on the couple of days he was off doing Brad things and not cuddled up with her on her couch, he'd called just to chat, and they'd ended up talking for hours. More light, fun times, more warm conversations, more forehead kisses. And now it was Saturday, and she was here with him, on a date. And somehow she knew there would be no more forehead kissing. Or maybe, more accurately, it would be replaced with a different kind of kissing. Her body liked that thought. Her heart was hopeful. Her brain, well, it had already decided it was going to take a back seat to the rest of her. Wow, he murmured. Heidi blinked, reorienting herself as she realized they'd arrived at the dock on the edge of the island, located in the middle of the bay, the decommissioned prison sitting atop it. There were more buildings than she'd expected, and it was also taller, with sharp cliffs leading almost straight down to the bay. "You better not fall down this one," Brad murmured into her ear. She laughed, startled. "You're joking about it now?" "I've witnessed several more of your so-called clumsy skills," he said, his hot breath still on her skin and making her shiver. "Do you remember the incident just last night when you somehow managed to get your hair stuck on the knob of the cabinet?" She remembered all right. She also remembered the gentle fingers untangling the strands, the way her body had reacted so intensely to his proximity. Rude, she muttered, even though she was definitely affected by his proximity even now. A woman had to have some pride, and if she couldn't muster at least a modicum of sarcasm, where would she be? The truth, he said, and my point is that I think I can afford a small joke. She wrinkled her nose. At least this one is better than your prison joke. He hissed out a breath. Ouch, that's cold, he said, stepping back and taking her hand. You're right, but damn, that's cold. Giggling, she tugged him toward the stairs that would take them to the bottom level of the ferry where they could disembark. Come on, I need to get my audio tour and visit the gift shop. And here I'd prepared myself to play tour guide, he said dryly as they hit the bottom step. I even have one of those little flowers so you can easily find me in the crowd. Do you really? His expression went serious, and he reached into his back pocket. Her mouth dropped open. But then he grinned, holding up his empty hand. Seriously, though, I did do some research before coming. Redoing the Visitor Center's website is next on my client list. Isn't it run by the government? I have a contract with the government, he said and leaned close. And now that I've told you that, I have to kill you. She swatted him. Stop joking around, she told him. Because seriously, that's awesome. How long have you had the contract? For a few years. The actual National Park Service site is run and managed by the government. I would never have the capacity to set up something so vast. But a lot of the visitor centers and tourist attractions are run by an outside company. He shrugged. I did that company's main site maybe 5 years back. And then a higher up in the tech department asked me to do a spread for Crater Lake. Now I've been slowly working my way through a lot of the national park's visitor interfaces. They do the actual functionality and building. I just advise on design and usability. He continued to hold her hand as they walked down the gangway. Next week is Alcatraz, and since it's here, I figured now would be as good a time as any to see the rock. Wow, that's really impressive. Another shrug. Not really, and certainly there wasn't any skill involved, he said. I'm just lucky that this fell into my lap and I could make a career out of it. They wouldn't keep you on if you weren't good. He glanced down at her, eyes dancing. Don't you know anything about our government? It's a giant pile of incompetence and overspend. Ah, so optimistic, she teased. Realistic is more like it. Okay then, she declared. I will be the barometer of all things talented. You'll show me a portfolio of your work, and I shall decree whether or not you're worthy. He tugged a lock of her hair, blowing in the breeze. Should I get you a crown, too? She fought back a smile. Obviously. A beat. And a scepter. He mimed making a note. I've got it on my mental checklist. More like your mental bullshit meter, she said. A tap to his nose. Ding, ding, ding. She glanced up at him, totally losing her fight with the smile, seeing that he wore an answering one in return. I also feel obligated to point out, she said, that you've taken me on a date so you can work. His mouth dropped open. Am I right? He shook his head, a band of pink appearing on his cheeks. No, that's not what I was doing. I just thought that since you said you hadn't seen a lot of touristy things and I was getting ready to work on this, that... Work, she repeated in a sing-song voice. His lips parted, closed, parted again. She went on tiptoe, let her mouth drift close to his ear, and felt a thrill weave through her when he shivered, at knowing that he was just as affected by her as she was by him. He turned his head, eyes blazing with emotion as they met hers. Then his lips quirked. Yes, I am. Heart pounding at the undertones in the conversation, knowing that neither of them was sincere about the asshole part. Heidi forced her gaze away and concentrated on just breathing. They'd reached solid ground. The ferry load of people were weaving their way up the path to enter the historic site, and they were all but alone under the partly cloudy day, the wind in their hair, the faint scent of the Pacific Ocean just beyond the Golden Gate filling her nose. It was a beautiful day with a beautiful man, and she was having the time of her life just chatting and joking and walking with him. If that wasn't the unicorn, she didn't know what was. And that was when Heidi lost her battle with self-control. Rising up on tiptoe, she kissed him. And not on his forehead either. Chapter 15. Brad. He was stunned into stillness for a heartbeat. Then he kissed her back. He'd been thinking about how beautiful she was with the sunlight dappling her skin, the wind ruffling her hair, the laughter dancing in her eyes. He'd been thinking how much he wanted to kiss her. "You can't do that here," the female voice said. He pulled back, blinked dazedly as he turned, trying to get his bearings. "I'm sorry, what?" His vision cleared enough to remind him where he was, for him to see that it wasn't just a woman standing behind them, but a guard with an official badge and uniform and intense-looking duty belt. The guard lifted an eyebrow. "I'd suggest you either start your tour or you end it." Heidi giggled, one pure burst of sound that had Brad fighting back a smile. "I'm sorry," he said. "We'll go get started." The guard nodded. "Carry on." Her eyes narrowed. "Well, not carry on," she waved a hand. "But please proceed with touring the facility." Another tiny giggle that did nothing for his self-control. But he managed to stumble out another apology, to tug a chortling Heidi up the path and away from the guard, all without them getting thrown in the brig or finding themselves packed onto the next ferry back to the mainland. "Your fault," he muttered. "Yours," a beat. "You need to stop being so charming." "I can't help it," he said. "It's a gift." "One the entire world gets to benefit from?" she asked archly. "Exactly." He stopped just past the turnstile after they'd paid for their tickets and glared down at her. "But as for the point at hand, I seem to remember you as the one doing the kissing." She sidled closer. "I seem to remember you kissing me back." Well, she had him there. "Come on," he said, instead of conceding the point. They picked up their audio guide. Heidi had wisely opted out of his tour, then put on their headphones as they walked into the first room. Cavernous, cold, gloomy. He hated it instantly, and the audio of the tour wasn't much better, adding to the oppressiveness of the place, making him regret that he'd even thought to bring her here, especially on a date. She slipped her headphones off, glancing around the room, eyes dimmed. "Let's go," he said. Her brows pulled together. "What? We just got here." "I hate it," he muttered. "Well, it certainly isn't sunshine and rainbows," she said. "But don't you have something for work you should be doing?" Asked so innocently that he nearly missed the teasing in her eyes. "I'm not going to live that down, am I?" "I'll pretend to forget about it if you pretend to forget I lost that battle with the cabinet knob." "Done." "Pleasure doing business with you," she said, sticking her hand out so he could shake it. "And I'm fine with going. I don't like it here either." A shiver. "Though part of me thinks we should push through and learn what we can." "I get that," he nodded. "But I don't think we'd be learning much." "Probably not. And I guess it reminds me too much of what is wrong with the world." She made a face. "I mean, we should know, because otherwise how are we going to help fix things? It's just—" He brushed his fingers over her cheek. "Probably not the best place for a date." "Yes." Her lips tipped up at the corner. "That." "Then we'll go do something else." She smiled up at him. "So how do we get out of here?" "Same way you do with all these tourist traps." He brushed a finger down her nose. "Through the gift shop." Laughing, she leaned close, weaving her arm through his. "Then lead on, O master of all things travel-related." He snagged her audio device, carrying both as they made their way through the cells, the cafeteria, the workrooms, the isolation room, weaving their path through the other patrons, pausing to take in a few signs with historical information, but for the most part, making their way to the exit as quickly as possible, which unerringly meant they ended up in the gift shop. "Of course," she said as they stepped into the bright room filled with racks of t-shirts and magnets and shot glasses and postcards. One entire wall had candy. Another held books. Heidi stopped by a set of dish towels and held them up. "Just what I always wanted." "Come on, Trouble," he said, tugging them from her hands and putting them down on the stack. "Let's see if we can catch this ferry before it leaves." A mock pout. "You owe me more shopping time at a future date." He towed her toward the door, down the path toward the dock. "I'll remind you of our earlier conversation in which you expounded on all things that are terrible about shopping." "Yes, shopping in general," she said, "but not about the only type of acceptable shopping." "What's that?" he asked as they boarded the ferry. "Books," she smiled, "and there happens to be some amazing bookstores in San Francisco." "Well," he said with tacit agreement as they both climbed the stairs, "since my date idea was a bust, I think it makes sense to try yours. We should hit up some of those bookstores instead." Her lips parted, surprise flitting in her eyes. "You're serious?" Thumb tracing that plump bottom lip, he couldn't resist pulling her close, the scent of her shampoo tangling with that of the sea air. He couldn't get over how she seemed to fit perfectly against him, as though her body had been made for his, as though she had been made for him. "I'm serious," he said, unable to bite back a smile. Joy lit up her face, and she did a little happy dance, one that had the positive benefit of brushing all those luscious curves against his body, and one that made him lose his battle with control. He dipped his head and kissed her. And this time there wasn't any guard around to make them stop. At least until they arrived back in the city proper, and then they got kicked off the ferry. But seeing Heidi with swollen lips, her hair doubly messed from his fingers in the wind, her cheeks pink and her eyes warm, and he decided a permanent ban from the ferry line was totally worth being able to kiss her, bar none. Chapter 16. Heidi. She kept glancing over at Brad, expecting to see boredom creep into his face. But every time she stopped browsing to check in, his expression wasn't annoyed or impatient. Instead, he almost seemed to be studying her, watching and filing away each movement. He disappeared when she'd become engrossed in the historical romance section, then had reemerged some quantity of time later. She really wasn't good at keeping track of the movement of the earth around the sun when there were books in front of her, his hands holding a few novels. And then she'd expected the impatience to start and so had quickly shifted her bundle, trying to hurry in her selections even though there were just so many choices. But instead of telling her to make a pick, he just snagged the book she tucked under one arm and told her to explore. She'd fallen in love, just a little bit, with that one word. Explore. God, the man was a menace. Now she was running her pointer finger over the spine of one more book. This one being one she already owned, only she had the UK version at home and was trying to decide if she liked the US version enough to have 2 copies. She started to push it back into place. No, her bookshelves were already overflowing as it was. She couldn't justify the second copy, especially with the stack that Brad was already carrying for her. "Okay," she said, turning to him. "Your torture is over. Hand me my stack so we can go check out." Except as the last word slipped off her tongue, her cell phone rang. "Sorry," she told him, reaching into her purse. "That ringtone is the lab." "Go ahead and answer it." He nodded toward the exit. "I'll buy these and meet you out there." She took a step, stopped, her cell in her hand. "I'll pay you—" "Go," he urged as her phone rang again. "We'll figure it out later." "Thanks," she said, hustling out onto the street and answering the call. Her weekend lab assistant, Maggie, was on the other end. "We have a problem," she began. And that was the moment Heidi realized her day with Brad was over. Because problem was an understatement. A mere problem would have meant that she might have been able to handle it over the phone, or at worst, email in written instructions to follow. A problem might have meant that she needed to check on the lab tomorrow, just to make sure all was fixed. This was a disaster. This had her immediately barking instructions. It also had Brad, who'd come out of the bookstore with 2 giant bags, take one look at her face and instantly begin directing her to his car. "Tell me where to go," he said when they'd gotten in and she'd paused in her orders. She rattled off the address. 10 seconds to put it into his cell, a quick lift in her direction so she could confirm the location was correct, and then a minute later they were on the road, winding through city streets jammed with pedestrians and Saturday traffic, and eventually making their way to the freeway and hightailing it south. "No," she exclaimed, "don't shut it down." They'd lose everything. She spared a look at Brad's cell, perched in a cradle connected to the air vent. "We'll be there in 10 minutes. Just keep the computers up and running. I'll adjust the machinery when we get there." Maggie said a few more things, mostly listing what she'd do to keep the computers working, but Heidi didn't hang up or get short. She knew that Maggie was panicked, especially since she hadn't been able to reach Steph, who was on call for the lab this weekend for just this type of issue. Maggie was a new grad. She was smart as a whip and funny, but she was also a bit anxious and a definite perfectionist. This had thrown her for an absolute loop. Not to mention, if she hadn't caught the miscalibration, the entire experiment would have been ruined. 6 months of research would have amounted to absolutely nothing. "Deep breaths," she said when Maggie had paused for air. "Everything will be fine." She hoped, but that was beside the point. I hope so, Heidi." "It was a good catch," she told her, "and we'll figure out the rest. Now I'm going to hang up and call Steph again." Okay." A moment later, she was dialing her lead assistant, the call ringing and ringing and ringing until... "Hello?" "Steph," she said, "it's Heidi. Why the hell haven't you picked up your phone? The computer's malfunctioned and the readings are writing over one another and... I'm in the hospital." "What?" "Fred," her 90-pound golden retriever, "pulled me over this morning. I didn't think I'd done more than twist my ankle and got a few bruises, but then my foot swelled up like a balloon and I couldn't walk on it." She released a shaking breath. "I think I'm going to need to have surgery." "Shit," Heidi whispered. "I know. I'll get the lab sorted and come straight over." Steph inhaled sharply, her normal no-nonsense tone returning. "Absolutely not. This is supposed to be your weekend off. Damage control and then call in Mateo. He can cover the lab for the rest of the time." Since she had planned on calling Mateo to take over, she didn't argue with Steph, just asked her a few questions about her injury and what hospital she was at. Because she sure as hell wasn't going to allow her assistant to go through that alone. Steph was good people, and she didn't have anyone in the area since she'd broken up with her boyfriend and he'd taken their friends. Assholes. Somewhere in the swirling in the back of her head, she made a mental note to make sure she, Cora, Kelsey, and Kate all brought the full frontal attack into folding Steph into their friend group. She needed some peeps, and ones that wouldn't disappear just because a boyfriend was a total twat waffle. "What room are you in?" 504, Steph said. "And here I live until at least tomorrow. They don't think the surgeon will be able to see me until then." "Oh no," Heidi murmured as she jotted the hospital name and the room number on a scrap of paper from her purse. Last thing she needed to do was forget one or the other with everything else going on. "Seriously?" "Seriously, but don't worry, I'm comfortable and have plenty of bad cable TV to keep me company." "What about a phone charger, or a change of clothes, or snacks, or a book?" she asked, mind jumping between her friend being in the hospital and the lab. "It's one night," Steph said. "Trust me, I've roughed it in worse places." "Hang in there," she said as they approached the gate for the lab. "Keep me posted on the equipment." Hell no, she wouldn't, or at least not any more than what was necessary, so Steph wouldn't worry and jeopardize her recovery. "I'll call you as soon as I can," she promised, then hung up, stashing her cell and pulling out her badge. "I'm afraid they won't let you in without the proper clearance," she told Brad. "You'll have to drop me out here and I'll grab an Uber home." "I can wait," he began. She touched his cheek. "I have no idea how long I'll be." "I don't mind." "Well, I do," she murmured. "I won't be able to concentrate in there if you're out here just twiddling your thumbs. Go home. I'll call tonight if it's not too late. Tomorrow, if it is." Dropping her hand, she pulled her purse onto her shoulder. "You can just park over there," she said, pointing to the row of visitor spots before the gate. He pulled to a stop and looked at her. "You sure you don't want me to wait?" A small smile. I've got plenty of books to keep me busy. She nodded. Thank you for offering. That's sweet, but I'm sure. Pausing with her hand on the handle of the door, she made a face and said, But I am sorry my work ruined our date. Don't worry about it, he told her. Now I've got plenty of ammunition to tease you back. I think we're equal, and that's it. He laughed. Maybe you're right. Hand still resting on the pull, she hesitated. I don't want to go. I know, baby, he murmured, pressing a quick kiss to her mouth that had her pulse skyrocketing and her lips tingling before he pulled back. But your work is important. Our stuff will hold. She released a trembling breath, her heart squeezing tight, a mental billboard flashing, unicorn, 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 across her mind. Thank you, she whispered. A sexy smile. Get out of here before I kiss that look off your face. You've got work to do. Heart full, she nodded, pulled the lever, and got out. She walked quickly to the gate and showed her pass. When they opened it for her, she glanced back, saw that Brad was still waiting for her, and waved. He waved back, then gestured at her to hurry up. Laughing, she turned her back on the gate, on the visitors' parking lot, on Brad, and hustled into the lab, thinking that she'd definitely found the unicorn. She just wasn't sure how long he'd stick around. Later that night, many hours later, after things in the lab had stabilized and she'd managed to save their 6 months of work, she stumbled into the parking lot, bleary-eyed and exhausted, Maggie staggering alongside her. Luckily, she didn't have to wait for a pickup, as Maggie had offered to get her home, and so they made their way over to her assistant's tiny hybrid. A few minutes later, they were on the freeway, heading for Heidi's place. Thanks again for driving me home, she said, staring out at the dark sky, at the bright flashes of white and red lights surrounding them. Thanks again for not firing me, Maggie said lightly. That calculation wasn't your fault, and you know it, Heidi shook her head. I honestly cannot think of what happened. All the numbers and settings were correct when I left yesterday, and we were the only ones in there. A beat. Except we weren't the only ones in there. Heidi frowned. What do you mean? Well, when I came in this afternoon to run the checks, I saw the cleaning crew leaving. She glanced over, then back at the road. I didn't think anything of it at first, and then after I noticed the readings, I was in too much of a panic to make sure the experiment didn't fail that I'd forgotten. And now you remember. A nervous look toward Heidi. Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't remember sooner. I'm not irritated with you, she said, digging around her purse and grabbing her cell. There were all sorts of notifications on the screen, but nothing from Steph, who texted a few hours before saying they were taking her into surgery after all. I'm just pissed that the protocol wasn't followed, especially considering everything that could have been jeopardized. She forced her tone to stay even. In fact, I think you probably deserve a raise for managing to get all of those half-life calculations on the backup hard drive before the data was erased. Heidi patted her arm. You did good, she said. I promised I'd tell you otherwise. Not so good, she muttered. Otherwise I wouldn't have had to call in the boss on our day off. Meh, won't be the first, nor the last. Now, she added, changing the subject before Maggie could go too far down the rabbit hole of feeling sorry for herself and/or feeling guilty for needing to call in backup. Tell me what it's like to be 22 and living in the city. What do all the cool kids do for fun? She laughed. What makes you think I'm remotely a cool kid? Because you're 22, Heidi pointed out. Trust me, Maggie said dryly. That's not nearly enough. But she did share a funny story about a bar called Bobby's she'd gone to with girlfriends the previous weekend, and how the front room was super fun with cool decor and fun music, but that the back room was filled with outdated tunes and people. I was just looking for the bathroom, and I swear it was like the middle-aged club had unleashed a party back there. There was dancing and drinking, and the noise was intense. I swear, they were having more fun than we were in that front room. How old were these middle-aged people, she asked, well familiar with Bobby's and definitely knowing that she and her friends were relegated to the back room, far away from the cool kids out front. God, Maggie said, turning into Heidi's complex. They must have been like 35, some even 40. Heidi choked on a laugh. She was 33, nearing 34. Apparently that was almost middle-aged. Heaven help her. Thanks again, she said when Maggie stopped in front of her condo. I'm so glad I didn't have to wait for an Uber. Maggie smiled, nodded. Thanks for being so cool about the lab. With a quick goodbye, she closed the door and headed up to the front door of her place. Oh, she'd been cool with Maggie. 1, because it wasn't her assistant's fault, and 2, because even if it had been, people made mistakes. But the cleaning staff going into her lab wasn't a mistake, or it wasn't a mistake any longer. She'd had to have a conversation with occupational health about not allowing the general cleaning company into the room 3 times already since she began at the company less than a year ago. This would mark a 4th, and the 4th broken promise, and one that had nearly jeopardized everything. So no, she wouldn't be the cool boss. Not any longer. In fact, she and several people were going to have a very stern conversation, and then if that didn't work, she was installing a fucking deadbolt herself, with a lock and key only she and her team had copies of. In fact, she was looking up said locks and keys, just to be preemptively prepared, when her phone buzzed with a text from Steph. Why the hell did you send Tall, Dark, and Handsome to look after me? Just saying, if he was my man, I'd have him under lock and key. The mirroring of her own thoughts should have been funny, except, what? Sending Tall, Dark, and who? But before she could ask that, Steph sent a picture of Brad, a vase of flowers in his hands as he placed snacks on a rolling table. He says you arranged everything. Surgery's over, obviously. Apparently it was less complicated than they thought. Heidi blinked, her finger starting to type out a reply, but her cell buzzed before she got there. Thank you. I know I said I was fine, but even though I didn't want to admit it, I was scared. Knowing that someone was out there in the waiting room looking after me, even though you'd sent him, made me feel better. She typed out another reply, something that probably barely made sense because her mind was spinning. But that was okay because she still didn't get to send it. Her cell vibrated one last time. Tell me all about it in the morning. Visiting hours are over and I'm going to zonk out. Heidi stared at her phone screen for several moments, then shook her head. And then her gaze alighted on something else, something she'd missed when she'd first stumbled her way inside. Her books were on her bookshelf, on the proper bookshelf, that being her to-be-read shelf. In the proper order, that being separated by genre, then alphabetized by author name. All except the title she'd been waffling about purchasing. The pretty U.S. cover was slotted right next to the U.K. one on her already read shelves. The hospital, her condo, the books, her friend. Brad, the unicorn known as Brad, had some explaining to do. Chapter 17. Brad. The knock at his door made him frown. It was late, and even though his family was pushy, they would definitely call first, especially considering it was nearing midnight. Someone must be confused, knocking at the wrong apartment. Maybe a DoorDash had gone wrong. Sighing when the knock came again, he set aside his book, the thriller he'd picked up earlier that day, and one that also had him wondering whether it was Russian mafia men or a terrifying serial killer on the other side of that door, and made his way to the door. He checked the peephole, because Russian mafia men and terrifying serial killers. But when he saw who was on the other side, his mouth dropped open, and he scrambled to release the deadbolt. "Heidi," he exclaimed the moment he'd wrenched open the door. "What are you—" She poked a finger into his chest. "You," she snapped, then slipped by him, striding into his apartment, her shining brown hair fanning out behind her like a cape. "You!" she exclaimed, spinning around to face him while he locked up. Her hands were on her hips, her legs were clad in pajamas, and her eyes flashed. "Me," he asked when it appeared that was all she was going to say. Her lips pressed flat, her chin lifted. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you do it?" His brows drew together. "The books?" He figured it was time to fess up. "I borrowed your spare key that night when you were hurt. It was there on your little organizer thing, and I didn't want you to be sleeping with an unlocked door. And I know it was probably an invasion of your privacy to keep it, but I've been staying late and didn't want you to have to worry about getting up." He shrugged helplessly. "I probably shouldn't have used it today, but I just figured you might like to read one of the books you bought." "You bought." He paused. "What?" "You bought the books," she said. "Not me." He hesitated, not sure where she was going with this. Her fury seemed to have dimmed somewhat, but she was still standing there, looking fierce and ready to avenge crimes. "I told you we could figure that out later." "It's later." She took a step toward him. "Okay." He glanced around. "I probably have the receipt around here somewhere." She took another step, her expression so intense that he found himself wondering about serial killers again. "But this isn't about the books," she said, coming even closer, until her scent filled his nostrils. Between her smell, her body, the way she kept coming closer, until her front was flush against his, and he wasn't operating on all cylinders. "It isn't?" he asked, confusion battling with desire now. He pushed the ladder down. He didn't want to fuck things up with this woman. She shook her head. "No." "What is it about then?" But her eyes were serious and sitting heavy on his. "Steph." Oh, shit. She reached up and cupped his jaw. "Why did you do it?" He could do nothing but tell her the truth. "You were worried about her." A shrug. "I saw her room number in the hospital on the note you wrote. I figured I'd just poke my head in and make sure she didn't need anything." "And you brought her flowers?" Shit, was that what this was about? Did she think that because he brought Steph flowers that he was trying to hit on another woman? That he didn't want Heidi? That couldn't be further from the truth. "Baby. And snacks. She's important to you, and..." Heidi rose on tiptoe and kissed him. "You brought her flowers, you wonderful man." She cupped his cheeks, holding him still when he went to kiss her again. "And her favorite snacks, apparently. How did you know?" He shrugged. "I didn't. I just made an educated guess based on how much you've been raving about those chocolate-covered pretzels," he admitted. "And then I figured I couldn't go wrong with Molly's." A smile. Someone really smart might have mentioned that to me once or twice. Her lips tipped up. "As I said, you wonderful man." "You're not mad?" Now her eyes danced with humor. "Does it seem like I'm mad?" "Actually, now that you mention it." She snorted. "Shut up and kiss me before I forget how wonderful you are." That was an exceptionally easy order for him to follow. His conscience dug its claws sharply into the sides of his brain and shook it fiercely. Because it had been 2 weeks since he'd begun his campaign to win her over. Only 2 weeks. And if he really wanted to show her that he was going to stick around, he couldn't just fall into bed with her again. Well, they were already in bed, but he couldn't sleep with her until she knew. Wrenching his head back, he broke the kiss. The one look at Heidi's face nearly had his conscience's hooks dislodging. Grabbing onto the threads of his control, he rested his forehead on her shoulder, sweat prickling on his nape, breaths coming in rapid intervals. He sat up, put the entire length of the mattress between them. "What's wrong?" she asked. Brad wasn't able to form words yet. The bed dipped, the consequence of his non-answer being that she came closer. Normally a perfectly acceptable reaction. Normally something he would have loved. But right then, right in that moment with him trying to remember all the reasons he could not jump on top of her like a rabid beast and have his merry way with her, right then her coming closer wasn't ideal. But she needed to know that he wasn't back in her life looking for a fantastic night. She had to understand what she meant to him, even if he'd only just discerned the meaning himself. He wanted this woman to comprehend the change she'd jump-started, the things she'd made him realize about himself, and he needed this woman to understand that he loved her. That he'd fallen that first night and had run because she'd pushed beyond the barriers surrounding his heart, even if he hadn't quite understood the panicked reaction until 2 weeks before, until that conversation with Jamie. Because she also needed to know what she was getting into, what baggage he was carrying and how it might bleed over. Hell, most sane people would say that his life for the past decade was a giant red flag, littered as it was with lost friendships and relationships that had never gotten off the ground because half of their party, him, had quite literally flown away whenever he got the whim. But Heidi needed to know that he didn't have the whim now, and that when he did travel, he wanted it to be with her by his side. And how was she going to believe that, huh, genius? He'd been back for all of a month, had spent even less than that with her. Why would she think that anything about him had changed or would change or... She placed her hand on his thigh, making him jump and lurch away from the contact, because he wanted to move closer. His breath sought in and out. His... The word was tentative enough that his eyes flew from the ground, from where he'd been counting the grains in the piece of hardwood floor at his feet, up to hers, up to collide with tentative hazel eyes that socked him in the gut. Do what? He asked. Pink on her cheeks, her eyes darting away. Do you not... A sigh before her chin rose. Do you not want me that way? Chapter 18. Heidi. What? He roared, closing the distance between them and all but hauling her into his lap. That's how much I want you. You breathe and I'm hard. You smile and I'm aching. You laugh and I'm ready to tear your clothes off. But, she whispered. But what? Embarrassment flooded through her, but she had to know, had to make sure that she hadn't imagined, hadn't made things bigger in her head than they were in real life. But things were just getting good, and then you stopped. Brad froze. Then he grinned, a hot, slow smile that she felt trickle along every nerve ending. What? She asked. The pale lighting brought out the golden hues hidden in his deep brown hair, made the stubble on his cheeks seem even darker. But it was his eyes that held her in place, that made her heart skip a beat. He stood, bringing her with him, then walked toward the headboard, positioning them both so they were resting with their backs against it. Or rather, he had his back against it. She was able to relax in the enviable circle of his arms, sitting on his lap, her shoulder against his chest. But best of all was the way his arms wrapped around her, drawing her close to his body, holding her tightly. She was protected, cared for, held as though she were important. Okay, he said. I'm only going to say this once. He paused, waited until her gaze came to his. You are quite literally the woman that I want most in this world. And I've been to a shit ton of places, he added, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. So you can know that I'm not spouting bullshit. Also, by want, I mean sexually. Refer back to all that breathing, smiling, laughing, and my cock feeling like it's going to break in half stuff I mentioned previously. His fingers brushed the shell of her ear, making her shiver and drift closer, until she could feel his next words glaze her lips. But also, more importantly, by want, I mean I can honestly say that you are the first woman I've ever spent time with who's made me look inside and recognize that I have some shitty characteristics that I need to change. She frowned, but he dropped a finger to her lips before she could protest. I hurt you, he whispered, his tone making her lungs seize, her heart convulse because there was so much pain in those words. And I will regret doing that for the rest of my life. I'm okay, she whispered. He smiled gently. Of course you are, because you're smart and capable and beautiful and you don't let dumbasses like me ruin your groove. Laughter bubbled up in her chest, but she held it back. That's true, she said instead, keeping her tone light. But, he said, I did hurt you, and I hate that I did, and a sharp sigh. Well, the truth is that I didn't even understand why I'd done it, why I'd panicked and run until 2 weeks ago. She rested her hand on his shoulder, kneaded the tight muscles there. Why did you panic and run? Because you were different. Maybe the words should have hurt her feelings. Being different wasn't typically good in these scenarios, but instead she understood at least part of what he was saying, because he'd been different too. Baby, she whispered. No, he said, just let me get this out, okay? And then you can decide if you're going to walk out that door like I probably deserve, or... Or what? She asked after a few moments when he hadn't finished the thought. Or, his hands came to her jaw, cupping it gently. If you'll let me keep you forever. Her pulse had slowed from the frenzied tattoo of their kissing, a steady and calm thrum-thrum, 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 that was pumping blood evenly through her veins. But his words sent it into warp speed, carousing through her body, vibrating in her fingertips, galloping through her legs, whirling through her brain. Forever? Gentle, still so gentle, but his eyes, they held a touch of humor. Yes, he said, forever. That's what people do when they find the one person on this planet who's destined for them above all others. That almost poetry sang to a part of her. The piece that had been devastated when she'd woken alone that day only a few months before. The same piece that understood what he was saying, that felt the same, that wanted that forever. The rest of her was overwhelmed. She hardly knew this man. But was that really accurate? True, they hadn't logged a lot of hours together yet, but she had seen so many of the important things. His time with Steph, the books, the date, the dinners and ice cream and movies and bad reality TV. The way he made her laugh and was quick to do so at himself. He was a good man. She knew that in her bones, knew it with as much certainty as she understood how many electrons orbited an atom of helium. That being two. She'd already decided she wasn't a coward. She'd already decided she was going to see where things went with this man. So why couldn't it be forever? Why not her? Why not this wonderful man? With the sun long set, with neighbors overhead clomping noisily across the ceiling, with a lovely, funny, sexy man in front of her saying he wanted her. Why couldn't that be? There wasn't any reason. It could be. Heart still tripping along, her pulse still skittering in her veins, she peeled his hands from her cheeks, lacing their fingers together. Okay, she murmured. What do you need to tell me? What could this man possibly tell her that he thought might have her bolting for the door? His eyes were equal parts wary and concerned. I keep people at a distance so they can't leave me. He swallowed hard. So they can't hurt me. She waited, because clearly there must be more to this. I've done it since I was a kid, he said. I didn't really realize it until recently, but I think it started when my mom got sick. It was easier to pretend everything was fine, that I was fine. He sighed. But the truth is that I continued doing it, and I used traveling as an excuse to keep my distance even more. She squeezed his hands. Hard to have a serious relationship when you're out of the country all the time. Yes, that. I'm sorry your mom was sick, she said. His eyes softened. It was a long time ago. She's a big presence in your guys' lives, though. Heidi slipped one hand free so she could push back her hair that seemed determined to get into her eyes. I can tell that just from the couple of times I've met her. She is, he told her. She's the glue that holds everything together. I can see how the fear of losing that might affect you. Brad stilled. Why am I hearing a but? She winced. Well, it's not so much a but. He cursed. I get it, he said, interrupting her and taking off down a tangent that had nothing to do with anything that she'd been thinking. I understand why you wouldn't want to trust your heart with someone who's just going to flit off and leave you alone, someone who's already done that. I totally get it if you want me to just keep my distance, to not keep pursuing you. Hell, if I was in your position, I wouldn't have been nearly as nice or understanding as you've been. I would have kicked my ass to the curb and... Are you? She interrupted, having the feeling that if she didn't interrupt, then she might never get another word in edgewise. He was too far along the road of self-chastisement, determined to flagellate himself until he was sufficiently punished for his transgressions. She saw now. She understood now what was in her heart and what was in his. Beyond the courage she'd summoned to take a chance with him, beyond her own hang-ups with self-worth, she saw that this man would take every opportunity to carry more than his fair share of burdens. He'd continue taking them on, one after another, piling them across his shoulders until he couldn't take a step, couldn't move forward at all, unless she stopped him. His words had faltered at her question, but he didn't answer it, so she prompted him again. "Are you?" He blinked. "Am I what?" "Are you going to flit off and leave me to wake up in my bed all alone again?" His expression clouded. "Fuck no," he said. "I've spent the last months imagining all the places I want to take you, everything I want you to see. If I travel, I want you right by my side." "So that's it?" Brows drawing together, he cocked his head to the side. "What do you mean?" "Is that all of your baggage? Everything that would have me kicking you to the proverbial curb?" I... His mouth opened and closed a few times, sounds rumbling up from his throat but not coalescing into actual words. She took pity on him. "I get keeping people at a distance, honey. I have a fucking PhD in the subject myself. My parents... Well, my dad is great, if sometimes a bit distant, and my mom... She's not so great, even though I keep telling myself that she always means well. It's just... She's not like your mom, and she's given me some wounds that run deep. So trusting people doesn't come easily for me. So I might push you away to stay safe." She trailed the fingers of her free hand along his jaw. "The thing is, you say you've used avoiding connections like a shield. And I get that. I feel that sentiment in my bones. I've had my heart broken, have that baggage with my mom, and those hurts, they fucking suck." She swallowed. "But when I saw how happy Kate was with Jamie, when I saw the relationship Kels has with Tanner, I knew that I wanted that." She rested her palm on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath. "I was fucking terrified to take that first step, to even admit that what I had in my life wasn't enough. But I did it. I promised myself that I would try, would hold tight to the truth that I was worth finding something as special as they had, and I did find it." Smiling up at him, she said, "Also, newsflash, what I found was you." He inhaled sharply. She pressed a kiss to his lips. "Because you're good and smart and caring and so much more than I could have hoped for, even with that armor on. But you know what's better?" He shook his head. "I think we've both come to the conclusion that whatever this is between us is different, is more, that it has the potential to be what Kate and Jamie have, what Kels and Tanner do too." She released a breath, laid the resolution she'd come to just before calling Kate and waking her friend up in the middle of the night on her honeymoon, who'd then had to wake up Jamie to get Brad's address on the table. Also, yes, she knew that she'd rung the alarm at the gossip committee and that her friends and all their nosiness would be descending shortly. But also, she didn't care, because Brad was important. Maybe it was something in the Huntington gene pool. Maybe it was just the power of Brad himself. Or maybe she was digressing when she really should be focusing on telling this man what was in her heart. So what I'm trying to tell you is to bring that armor, carry that big-ass shield. Try to keep me at a distance, because I won't stay away. Because my armor is gone, she said. Or maybe when it came to you, honey, I never had any. He was still as a statue, hardly breathing, his eyes locked on hers. Meanwhile, she was breathing heavily, her heart pounding, her lungs working hard after that long-ass speech. And he was frozen, shock written into every line of his face. "Did I break you?" she asked, jostling his chest lightly. Her question seemed to snap him out of whatever trance he'd stumbled into, because he blinked, his hand slipped from hers, his arms banded around her, and he drew her flush against him. "No," he whispered, "you didn't break me. You turned the key, made me see exactly what I was missing." Her heart pulsed, happiness welling within her. "Great," she said, wrapping her arms around him in turn, bringing their mouths close so the barest millimeter separated them. "So now, will you get back to kissing me?" She had one quick glimpse of that slow, sexy smile of his, the one that always melted her from the inside out. Then his mouth was on hers. Chapter 19. Brad. He slept like a baby, holding the woman he loved in his arms, knowing that everything in his life would finally work out. Only when he woke in the morning, it was to find out that he might not have run, but Heidi had. Chapter 20. Heidi. She'd closed her car door and rolled her shoulders, her brain absolute mush, but her heart completely full. A night in Brad's arms. So when she'd gotten the call from Steph asking if she might possibly have time to bring her computer to the hospital, she'd gone to her friend's apartment, gathered anything and everything Steph might need, including the laptop. She'd also inquired about Fred, the misbehaving pooch, who it turned out was safe in the care of Steph's dog sitter, and tried unsuccessfully to avoid the topic of Brad. Not because she wanted to hide things. Quite the opposite, actually. She was practically bubbling with joy and excitement and affection for the man. But she wanted Brad to be just hers for a little while longer. Then she'd do the adult thing and share. Luckily, Steph's doctor had come in before the interrogation had gotten too intense, but Heidi knew it wouldn't be long before she got the 5th degree from multiple angles. Hell, Steph would probably join forces with Cora, Kate, and Kelsey, and then it would be 4 against 1. And if she were being completely truthful, she couldn't wait to share her happiness with her friends. She'd hoped to go back to Brad's afterward, to knock on his door, since he hadn't had a set of hooks in his apartment with a labeled spare for her to pilfer, like she had at her place. But then she'd gotten pulled into the lab to double-check the calibrations so the assistant staff could be confident running everything. That was supposed to have been a short visit, her goal of getting back to Brad still within reach. But after she'd checked the equipment, made sure everything was ready to roll without her, she had run into the head of operations. And then she'd become mean boss. Or mean underling, she supposed, since she didn't outrank him, though her lab was run outside of the normal management channels. Either way, she'd read him the riot act. Professionally, of course. And by then, the CEO had gotten word of what had nearly happened, and she ended up on a call with those two and the heads of the Health and Human Services and Occupational Health. And, well, she didn't want to get the cleaning staff in trouble, per se. They worked hard, but the team needed to find out if it was a lack of training that had caused the crew to be where they shouldn't, or if it was because they were disregarding the protocols. The details of how they sorted that out weren't important, and not part of her job, suffice to say. But Heidi was very confident there wouldn't be another issue. Especially because as she'd left, she'd seen the keypad lock being installed on the door. It would go into operation tomorrow, and she would be setting the codes. Not quite a lock and key, but she'd take this version. But now it was late in the afternoon, and she was back at her place after having stopped by to make sure Steph was good. But Heidi hadn't stayed long at the hospital. She was tired from her early morning and from lack of sleep the night before, though she couldn't complain about the cause of the latter. And all she wanted to do was change into some jammies and then call Brad. Maybe she could convince him to bring pizza again. "You just going to stand there all day?" She jumped, whirled around, her elbow colliding with the car window, making her wince and rub the abused joint. "Stop doing that," she hissed at Brad, who was closing the distance between them with a decidedly stormy expression, one that tempered the burst of excitement she'd felt at hearing his voice, at seeing him. "At least you weren't near a hill you could fall down this time." He stopped in front of her, crossed his arms. "What?" she asked. He just lifted a brow. "What?" she asked again. "You pulled a runner?" he asked. "Really?" He shifted closer, placing his hands on either side of her, boxing her in against her car. The spicy maleness of him wafting over her, the hard, hot lines of his body pressed to hers, causing her to need a minute to process his words. Which is probably why he continued talking. "You can run, Heidi. You can run from us, from me. You can put that armor back on, but I'm not letting you go. I'm not giving you up, not when what we have is so fucking—" She was confused and tired, and her feet hurt from being on them for most of the day. She wanted those jammies and that pizza and this man. which was why she placed her fingers over his mouth and asked, "What the fuck are you talking about?" Of course, then she didn't give him a chance to answer, not when the first part of his words processed and she'd finally comprehended what he'd said. "What the hell do you mean I pulled a runner?" she snapped. "I came here and put on adult clothes, visited Steph in the hospital, was pulled into work, and then went back to see Steph, and now I came home to shower." She glared. "After which, I was going to put on pajamas and see if I could convince you to bring me pizza." She jabbed a finger into his chest. "How is that pulling a runner? How is that—" "You left," he said, eyes hot with anger, body still pressed to hers. A growing situation against her abdomen, making her lose the threads on her outburst. "And you didn't pick up your phone." His fingers tangled in her hair. "And you weren't here. Weren't on the trail. I even called Jamie to see if Kate had heard from you because—" "You thought I'd left," she finished. He nodded, brows drawn together. Any irritation she'd been feeling from his demeanor faded, because she knew what that felt like, and further that, she knew what he'd revealed last night might not have seemed like a giant bombshell to her, but that it had been big to him, something that had eaten at him for a while. Then to wake up and find her not there. "Did you not see the note I left you?" She tacked it right to the center of his mirror, thinking he wouldn't miss it, would stumble upon it first thing when he got up and, well, used the facilities. His lips parted on an exhale. "You didn't," she confirmed. He shook his head, his expression drawn, his eyes downcast. "Oh, honey," she murmured, pushing lightly at his chest, coaxing him back a step, heart squeezing. "I told you last night. I'm not going anywhere." She took his hand, straightened her purse on her shoulder. "Come on, let's go inside." Once they'd made it through the door, she asked, "Why didn't you call me?" He turned and shut the wooden panel, flipping the lock. "I told you earlier," he said, though his tone was without rancor. "I did, but you didn't pick up." Frowning, she slipped off her shoes, tucked them neatly on the rack, then hung her purse on its hook, reaching inside for her phone. "Oh," she winced. She turned it off when she went into the lab and hadn't turned it on. Warm fingers covered hers, snagging her cell, and then Brad glanced down at the screen. His eyes rose to hers, hazel irises darkened with frustration. "Seriously?" She winced again. "It's not like I try to forget." A sigh lifted his shoulders, sending them south on the exhale, his chin tipping back, gaze going up to the ceiling. "Plus, no one besides my mom ever really calls me. They always text, and then when I get a moment to check, I catch up." Her own shoulders were inching up toward her ears, defensiveness and guilt warring within her. It really was a bad habit. Not to have it off at work, but to be unavailable because she'd forgotten to turn her cell on at other times. This wasn't even the first time that she'd heard this same complaint. But her friends got it, and she normally wasn't sad to miss a call from her mother, listing all of her inadequacies when it came to being a proper woman who could provide her grandchildren. Plus, her friends all had the direct line to her lab, so they could get her that way if it was an emergency. Or sometimes they emailed, reminding her to check her messages. But Brad hadn't had any of those options, because she hadn't given them to him. Shit. "I'm sorry," she said, turning and taking the phone from him, which he'd powered up, and setting it on the cradle she had on the table to charge. Already the screen was filling with missed calls, voicemails, and text banners. Yet another wince. "Really, I'll get better and—" She gave him her other info, her work email and number, even the information for the front desk in case it was an emergency and he couldn't get her the other ways. Dutifully, he typed in the numbers and saved her email to his contacts. But though the edginess in his expression had eased, he still wasn't his normal, smiling self, and another bolt of guilt shot through her. She dampened the comfortable rapport they'd built, made him worry while she'd spent the day in peaceful happiness. And now her normally sweet, teasing, lovely man was diminished, shadows beneath his eyes, lines edging his lush, kissable mouth. "I really am sorry," she whispered. He closed his eyes, inhaled and exhaled slowly. "It's not," he shook his head. "It's not your fault, sweetheart. It..." She did what she would have wanted. She stepped into his arms and hugged him tightly. He wrapped his arms around her in return, burying his face in her hair, and breathed in deeply, just holding her for a long, long time. Eventually, he loosened his hold, stepping back and cupping her cheek. "I'm okay now," he murmured. "Sorry, I freaked out." "Don't apologize. I'm the one who's—" "Don't apologize," he said, taking a page out of her book, smiling down at her. "Did we just have our first real fight?" she asked. "No," he said, cupping her jaw. "That was when you told me I wasn't washing the dishes correctly." She frowned, felt her brows draw together. "When was that?" "One night last week." "Which night?" Now she caught a glimmer of humor in his eyes, felt that last little bit of guilt settle and drift away. "Not telling you if you don't remember." A smirk that made her want to kiss him. Well, she could do that. So she did, lifting up on tiptoe and pressing her mouth to his. His lips parted immediately, and she dipped inside, loving that she could hold and touch and kiss this man, that he'd somehow become hers, that she'd likewise become his. "You're impossible, you know that?" she asked when they pulled apart for air. "I'm something," he said, wrapping his hands around her hips and tugging her against him, against his hard cock, his lips finding hers. Chapter 21. Brad. He stared at the woman who'd stolen his heart and smiled. Her hair pulled back into a high ponytail, tight jeans encasing the sexy legs he'd spent a copious amount of time in between this last month. Her color was high from her exertion on the trail, but she hadn't once complained that he'd hauled her out of bed on a Saturday morning before sunrise and had driven her out to this regional park. That had probably been helped by the hot coffee and 2 huge banana chocolate chip muffins he'd used to coax her out from beneath the covers. Luckily for him, she was a morning person, and though she'd grumbled and groaned a little bit, she'd quickly gotten into the spirit of the adventure. Now they'd reached the precipice of that sharp incline and could see the view he'd known would be spectacular, but that was made even more so by Heidi being next to him. She sank down onto a bench, and he plunked down next to her, warning, "I'm all sweaty," when she cuddled up next to him. "Well, I am too," she said, wrapping an arm around his waist and snuggling her head into his chest. "2 sweaties make a right." He laughed, but then the sun made it fully over the horizon behind them, its rays flying forward to glimmer over the ocean in front of them, making the moisture in the air sparkle like golden smoke, or maybe like some sort of otherworldly magical power. Lifting his camera, he took several shots of the gorgeous display. But then his focus, and the camera lens, drew back down, and he took pictures of Heidi, who, once she realized what he was doing, blushed and hid her face in his chest. "Close up much?" she said against his t-shirt. He laughed but set the camera aside, cupping the side of her face and turning it up so he could kiss her. "Only way to capture those beautiful eyes of yours." She made a face. He kissed her. But eventually they needed air and broke apart, sitting on that bench, on a precipice high above civilization, looking out at the Pacific Ocean and watching the sky brighten as the sun rose behind them. He traveled the globe, visited all 7 continents, stayed in tiny villages and big cities, and never had he felt more certain that he was in the right place, because the right person was next to him. Later that day, after they'd taken a much-deserved nap, they made plans to binge another of Heidi's bad reality TV shows, and he wouldn't admit this to anyone, but he'd actually begun to like them. Okay, some of them. But what he really liked was her reactions to them. The gasps of outrage, the anger for one of the cast being wronged, which usually came in the form of a broken heart. The occasional tear when something sweet happened. But just as they had pulled out their phones to figure out what to order in for dinner, there was a knock at the door. Heidi frowned. "I've got it," he told her, shifting her feet from his lap and standing up. "It's probably someone trying to sell me solar panels," she grumbled. "Well, I'll tell them to take a hike," he said, opening the door. "That hike isn't happening, bro," his brother said, towering over a trio of women. He laughed, probably at the confusion on Brad's face when that trio pushed the door open, barreled past him with nary a look, and sandwiched themselves around Heidi on the couch. "I haven't seen this episode," Kate said, grabbing the bowl of popcorn he'd made, and, for the record, had only gotten to eat one handful of. "Start it over." "Come on." Brad blinked at Jamie's voice, blinked again when a jacket was shoved into his chest, followed by his wallet, keys, and phone, all of which had been given a proper home on Heidi's organization station by the door. "Let's go." "Go where?" he asked as Jamie threw his arm around his shoulders. "Whatever you were planning with Heidi ain't happening," he coaxed Brad out the door. "So let's go grab a beer and some wings." He shook his head. "What?" Jamie sighed and started hauling Brad down the porch. "Wait." He ducked up from beneath his brother's arm, hopped up the stairs, and locked the door. Then turned back around to see Jamie studying him. "What?" His brother just smiled and shook his head. "Let's go get that beer." "Okay," Jamie said when they were seated at a bar with a scarred wooden top, their stools slanted so they could watch the latest gold hockey game. "Okay, what?" "Tell me all about it." He took a sip of his beer. "About what?" he asked, playing dumb. Jamie rolled his eyes. "Nice try, but we've been back a week, and Kate has been beside herself with curiosity. You need to give me the goods, or my new wife will leave me." Brad snorted. "Then she'd have to find someone to take care of the cock." His brother froze, slowly set down his beer. "Dude." Heidi would have laughed, he muttered, glugging down his own since Jamie had driven them to the bar. "Heidi is actually why we're in this mess." He glared. "Don't say anything bad about her. She's great." Jamie raised his hands in surrender. "I would never do that. She is great, and she's one of Kate's best friends, but—" He trailed off like Brad would fill in the blanks. And he supposed he would, because he knew exactly what his brother was thinking. When would he be leaving again? Reaching across, he grabbed Jamie's forearm, squeezing it tightly. Not because he wanted to hurt his brother, but because he needed him to understand. "She's it." Jamie nodded, but concern was still laced throughout his expression, and Brad knew he didn't get it. "She's my Kate," he said. "You know all that shit with Mom, with that grain of sand itching beneath the surface, the prickle of irritation that never seemed to go away?" Jamie nodded when he paused. "To keep with that metaphor, Heidi is that pearl." Brad waited, and then waited some more for his brother to say something, to congratulate him on finding the other half of his soul. But Jamie just quietly stared at him. "You're wondering if I'm just going to fucking disappear again, aren't you?" He pulled his hand back, clenched his jaw tight. "Well, I'm not. I've been all over this fucking world, and I can say with absolute certainty that none of that means anything without a person to share it with." "So does that mean you're done traveling? That you're just going to live here permanently?" "Yes." He sighed when he saw his brother still didn't get it. And who could blame him? Brad had taken a sharp right turn. Hesitation in his brother's gaze, and fuck, that stung. "I don't think you would hurt her intentionally," Jamie began. "But I wonder if you're not moving kind of quickly. You're used to being free and moving to your own beat all the time." He lifted his hands, palms out in surrender. "I'm not saying that's a bad thing, not at all. I know that Heidi is married to her job here, and she has deep roots in this area. She grew up here. Cora, Kelsey, and Kate are here. I'm sure she'd be happy to travel. I've never seen that woman back down from an adventure or a challenge. But I don't think that she'd be happy to uproot her life all the time." He winced. "And frankly, I don't think her job will allow for it." None of these were things Brad didn't know. But none of these things made that old prickling to run, to leave, to hide beneath the prospect of leaving, come back. Instead, he just felt certain that he'd be putting down his roots where Heidi was. "Look, Jame, I know what you're saying," he sighed. "But the truth is that for the first time in my life, I don't have another trip planned. Usually when I'm in the middle of one set of travels, I'm already searching for the next place to visit, chasing that high of something new, something that could mute the itch that tells me to keep moving, to keep searching, to never stop looking. He clenched his hand into a fist, rested it on his thigh. This is different. I feel different. How? When I first met Heidi, it was like everything inside me both stood up at attention and settled down. I knew that she was special, but I was fucking terrified after spending time with her. I knew that given the chance, she'd burrow herself deep inside my soul, and not because she was trying to, but because she didn't have to. A shake of his head. She was just herself, and I knew that she was more than anyone I had ever met. She's fucking incredible, and she was in me deep in an instant. And I was so unnerved that I ran in the other direction. Jamie was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What changed now?" He stopped, considered how he could possibly encapsulate how much had changed, because everything had changed. "Jamie," he began, then stalled out. "Hey." His brother grabbed his shoulder, squeezing it lightly until Brad looked up from counting the bubbles in the froth of his beer. "The girls are together and watching reality TV. They've got a bottle of tequila for margaritas, books to discuss, and 2 members of their unwind club to interrogate. Heidi, because of you, and Kate, about our honeymoon." He picked up Brad's beer and handed it to him before snagging his own and clinking the glasses together. "What I'm trying to say is that we have plenty of time to hash out all this shit." He took a sip. "It'll be a good 4 hours before I get the call to go play designated driver." Brad traced a pattern in the condensation on the outside of his glass. "I know it seems like I'm being an asshole," Jamie said, "and it's not that I don't believe what you're saying. I don't want either of you hurt. And I don't want you to have gotten things straight in your head and then limit yourself, and... Fuck, now I sound like an extra-large asshole." He thumped his hand on the bar. "Ignore me. I'm playing the role of the worried older brother. You're great. Heidi is great. You both deserve to be happy, regardless of my big brother vibes." "Jame," he said, and stopped, not sure what to say, not when his mind was spinning. "Fuck," Jamie said, probably catching a glimpse of that whirlwind. He shoved a hand into his hair. "For real, ignore me. I don't have any right to question you or Heidi's decisions. You know that my relationship with Kate all began with a lie. We pretended to be engaged, for fuck's sake. So how could I possibly think that I can give anyone my advice on relationships?" Brad's shoulders relaxed, the tension in his gut brought on by his brother's questions easing with the sincerity in his tone. "If Heidi is your Kate, then I'm so fucking happy for you," Jamie laughed. "Because God knows these women give us a hell of a ride. But it's absolutely worth it. And I thank fuck every single day that I answered that DM, that I somehow managed to get Kate in my life." "And now she's tied to you permanently," he said. Jamie nodded, happiness etched into the lines of his face. "Yep, she's mine forever." A fact that made Brad very jealous. He wanted Heidi in his life always. He wanted her to wear his ring, to carry his babies, to be tied to him forever. Jamie chuckled. "Until she realizes that I did a shit job of collecting her gossip." That made him smile and shake his head. "We'd do anything for them, wouldn't we?" Jamie clinked their glasses again. "Yes, we would." And with that, he took another sip, then a deep breath, and he told his brother everything. How his last trip had opened that lid and made him understand he wasn't happy. How coming back and realizing he'd hurt Heidi had made him feel like the lowest piece of shit on the planet. How Jamie telling him what their mom had said had made everything clear. How Heidi deciding to give him a chance had made everything seem possible. And how this last month had been the absolute best of his life. He confessed every last thing in his heart and mind. Because his brother was that older, constantly worrying sibling. Because he wanted to tell someone who would understand. Someone who got just how important this all was. And because he didn't want his brother to get in trouble with his wife. Chapter 22. Heidi. "I'm inviting my friend, Steph, to join us on our next girls' night. she declared, the moment the door had shut behind the boys. There was a strategy with these playdates, she supposed was the correct word. But the point was, the person with all the gossip couldn't just give it up right away. She had to make the others work for it. No, that wasn't true. She wanted to share every detail with them. Just first, she had the more pressing business of making sure Steph was included. Cora sat back, snagging the bowl of popcorn from Kate's hands and scarfing down a huge handful. "Isn't she your assistant at work?" "She's my lab assistant," Heidi told her, "not answering my emails and taking notes during meetings. She runs the lab when I'm not there, and she just broke up with her boyfriend, who got her friends in the divorce, by the way, the fucking assholes, and she doesn't have any family close." They all made sympathetic noises, lamenting about fair-weather friends, and she knew that Steph would be welcomed into the fold of the Unwine Club. Kelsey grabbed Heidi's cell from the table, held it out to her. "Why don't you call her and invite her over?" "Well, because her relationship isn't the only thing broken." Then she related the tale of Steph's dog and the broken ankle and the surgery. "She's been home for a bit now, but she's not up for traveling much yet." "Oh my God," Kelsey said. "Poor thing." Kate lifted her glass, already filled with a slushy margarita, courtesy of Cora having commandeered Heidi's blender and getting busy with the tequila, and took a huge sip. "Next time, we bring the party to her." Cora nodded. "Totally agree. She won't know what hit her." Kels grinned. "Exactly. We're like the mafia. Once you're in, there's no getting out." Heidi relaxed, knowing that Steph would be right at home with her crew. "What does she nerd out about?" "You know," she said slowly, "I don't actually know." Kate rubbed her hands together, evil genius style. "We'll ply her with tequila and find out all of the deep and dirty secrets. Mwahaha!" "You're still high from your honeymoon," Cora said, shoving Kate's shoulder. "Maybe," Kate shrugged, a smug smile on her lips. "Maybe not." They laughed, and then Kelsey asked about the resort, and Kate was off and running, talking about all the fun things she and Jamie had done. From parasailing to massages on the beach, they seemed to have hit all that the hotel had to offer. "But mostly," Kate said, "mostly we had lots and lots of hot monkey sex." She reclined back on the couch. "And it was glorious." They all made the appropriate sounds of retching and, "Oh God, my ears!" But they were happy for Kate, happy that their friend had found the person she was supposed to spend the rest of her life with. And then their eyes turned to her. "What?" she asked innocently, taking a long sip of her drink, which Cora promptly snatched from her, making her nearly choke on the slush she'd managed to get in her mouth. "Details." Kate bounced on the cushions next to her, cheeks highlighted pink from the power of tequila. "Now." Heidi thought about drawing it out, about torturing her friends, getting them to beg for details. But in the end, she couldn't, and she didn't want to, and hell, she was fighting back the urge to yell from the rooftops that she loved one Brad Huntington. Loved? She froze, words screeching to a halt inside her throat. Because loved. A blip as her heart began beating again, as surety slid through her. Yes, loved. She loved Brad. And she was so fucking excited about it. So she told her friends about falling in the creek, and the dinners and the dates. She told them about coffee and muffins and pre-dawn hikes. She told them about books and keys and a man who cared where she was. But the only thing she didn't tell them was about the whole loving thing, because she was going to tell that to Brad first. "Margaritas are the best," she said, curling up on the couch and resting her head on Kate's shoulder. Kate tapped her glass against Heidi's. "I totally agree." "Shh," Cora hissed. "This is the best part." Dutifully, they both turned their gazes toward the TV, toward the knockdown, drag-out fight happening on the screen, then to their friend who was riveted by the action. "You wouldn't be shushing us if you hadn't cheated and watched ahead," Heidi muttered grumpily. "If I hadn't cheated and watched ahead, you would be missing this gloriousness right now," Cora pointed out. Rightly so. Which was why Heidi didn't argue, just put her glass to her lips and enjoyed the rest of her fourth margarita. Or maybe it was her fifth? Lightweight that she was, she couldn't remember anything after the second. Mentally shrugging, she decided she didn't care. She could kick her friends to the curb, collapse into bed, and sleep until noon tomorrow if she wanted. A table overturned on screen, sending an arrangement of cupcakes flying in all directions and making her wince in memory of Kate's ruined wedding cake. But then she couldn't help but giggle, because the show stars had decided to attempt to save the remaining stack that was teetering this way and that. Unfortunately for them, that teetering ended up turning into splatting when two of the cast slipped on fluorescent blue frosting and managed to knock the remainder of the sweet confections to the ground. "You should take lessons from them," Kelsey said, her color high, the words carefully enunciated in a way that told Heidi she'd had more than 3 margaritas, too. "Why?" she asked innocently. "It's not like there are any weddings coming up for me to ruin." Kelsey took a sip. "Well, actually, Tanner and I did a thing." She held up her hand. Heidi squinted through blurry vision, blinking until it focused on the sparkling diamond band sitting next to the engagement ring on Kelsey's finger. Kate, the only one of them who had any skill in holding her alcohol, lurched up from the couch, nearly spilling the remnants of her margarita as she plunked the glass on the table and clambered over Cora's legs to grab Kelsey's hand. "Are you fucking serious?" Cora asked, but it wasn't directed at Kate and her clambering. Rather, it was to Kels, who they all waited with bated breath to answer, who nodded, her lips curving into a huge smile. "We eloped," she said. "We just wanted to be married without all the hoopla." She nibbled on her bottom lip. "I was hoping you guys might be able to help us plan a big party to celebrate." Heidi looked at Kate, who looked at Cora. Then they all moved at once. "Oh my God!" They all jumped up, throwing their arms around each other, a tequila-scented hug surrounding them all, their voices overlapping, the chatter indecipherable except that it was filled with excitement. "When did you guys do it?" Kate asked once they'd managed to calm themselves enough to conduct actual adult conversation again. "Last weekend. We just woke up on Saturday morning and decided to fly to Vegas," Kels said, dutifully holding out her hand so they could admire the ring, and then told them the rest of the story. How her family was pressuring her for a wedding, preferably a big one since Kels was the only daughter. How the wedding planning was stressing them out, and how they'd ultimately just decided to fly to Vegas and become husband and wife in truth. "I did promise my mom a big party," she said, "after we get home." "Kels," Heidi whispered, hugging her tight. "I'm so happy for you." Cora nudged her out of the way. "I need to hug the bride." "Or the former one, anyway. Now I'm just the wife," Kels said, her smile huge as she wrapped her arms around the petite brunette for a few moments before they all circled up, drinks in hand, and toasted Kels. "Thank you guys, but actually I feel terrible," she told them, setting her glass down, then lifting her hands to her cheeks and pressing them against the flushed skin. "I think my mom is really disappointed." Cora grinned. "She'll have a big party to plan. She'll be fine." "You deserve to have what you want," Kate reminded her. "You didn't want a huge wedding with you at the center of it. You wanted your special moment with Tanner." "You're not mad I didn't invite you guys?" Heidi smoothed back her hair. "No, babe, we're happy that you're happy." "You sure?" Cora snorted and refilled her glass. "We're sure." A beat. "Just keep the cake far away from Heidi." "Hey!" Kels sank back down onto the couch, picking up her glass again and drinking deeply, her eyes still tinged with chagrin. "Even my mom and you guys aside and the requisite guilt, it was still the happiest moment of my life." A sigh. "I love him so much, guys." "Why am I sensing a but?" Kels made a face. "Well, he had somehow taken the time to write these beautiful, touching vows, words that made my heart squeeze and my tears coming into my eyes, and he'd probably been planning them for months. And I didn't even have anything besides the normal ones, and I kept thinking I should have done more." Cora snorted. "Kels, seriously?" "What?" She tossed up her hands, nearly spilling her drink. He was just probably relieved he didn't have to keep waiting forever to marry you, Kate said. Jamie told me that was the worst part of getting engaged. Well, our real engagement anyway. That there was so much waiting until our real lives could start. Not that we didn't have something real together before the wedding. It was just like there was a hidden hurdle ahead that we needed to leap over. And it didn't matter what flowers we had or the cake or the vows. We were just ready to start our happily ever after. She squeezed Kels's hand. This is the important part. The rest of it is just calorie-adding condiments to the happy sandwich of your lives. Cora burst out laughing. What? Kate asked on a scowl. Condiments? Cora asked. Really? What's the wedding? Mayonnaise? Ew, Kate said. No, it's fig jelly on a yummy toasted sourdough. What about apricot? Ignoring them waxing poetic about jam, Heidi gave Kels a squeeze. I promise the vows aren't even registering in Tanner's brain at all. Even though mine were really freaking lame. Even though. Except it wasn't Heidi replying. They jumped, their gazes all shot to the door, noticing the 3 men standing in the hall, Brad closing the door behind them. Tanner, who'd been on a night shoot earlier and who also looked gorgeously rumpled, moved forward, closing the distance between him and Kels and pulling her into his arms. His lips went to her ear, and Heidi deliberately looked away after she heard, I don't care, sweetheart. I just am so happy to be married to you, and I want to make babies, and... Cora glared at Kate's hubby, talking over the lovey-dovey couple. How long have you been there? Since the squeeing, Jamie said dryly, slipping past her to kiss Kate soundly on her lips. Thank God Heidi has thick walls, he added when they'd broken apart for air, or else the neighbors would be complaining. I'll have you know, Heidi told him, though her eyes were on Brad, her gaze invariably drawn to his, that I had the sheetrock soundproofed for precisely that reason. She nibbled the inside of her mouth, stare dripping down to trace the yumminess that was the man who'd stolen her heart. He was slender and muscled, the scruff on his jaw making her shiver in memory of how it felt against her skin, her breasts, her thighs. But it was his eyes that truly drew her in, because he looked at her just like Jamie looked at Kate, Tanner at Kels, with warmth and love and affection, and his own special brand of light-hearted Brad teasing, one that made her smile even now. Hi, he mouthed. Hi, she mouthed back. His lips twitched. Her heart thudded. The man was just wearing jeans, a t-shirt, socks, but he was still the most beautiful thing she had ever laid eyes on. Or maybe that was the way he made her feel. Her gaze dropped down to his feet, to the socked feet. Socked because he'd put his shoes on the rack. Without a word from her, he'd noticed that she'd cleared a spot for him on the holder, and she hadn't even needed to mention it before he put his shoes there. He just paid attention and accepted that she liked things to be put in their proper spot, and he'd done it without comment. And that, combined with the excitement of Kelsey, of her early morning with him, of the last few weeks and all his wonderfulness, and also maybe the margaritas, 5, it was definitely 5, had her blurting, I love you. His eyes widened, but she was more aware of the room going silent. It had been filled with chatter, Cora, Kate, and Kels talking with Jamie and Tanner, but her her yelled-out declaration, had the room going quiet, had 5 pairs of eyes coming to her. Well, 6 if she counted Brad, whose pretty hazel eyes were heavy with an emotion she couldn't read from this far away. Then he was moving toward her. More than moving toward her. One moment he was across the room, and the next he was there, one arm wrapping tightly around her hips and tugging her against his chest, the other moving higher until his fingers slid in her hair, weaving into the strands and gently tilting her head back. What did you say? He whispered. Kate's voice penetrated the Brad fog descending around her. We'll just go. No, Cora said. We're staying, and... Ouch! Kels, let go! And that was the last she heard of her friends. At least of any words being spoken, because obliquely, she processed them gathering their things, of footsteps moving toward the door, of that panel clicking closed behind them. Then her condo was empty of everyone except her and Brad, who was stroking tiny circles on her scalp, making prickles of sensation trail down her spine, her arms. "You love me?" he asked. Her cheeks went hot, and not from the margaritas this time. The tequila was wearing off, and she was feeling exceptionally vulnerable, especially since he hadn't said it back. "Brad," she whispered, "you, She shook her head, dislodging his fingers, starting to pull away. His arm around her waist tightened. "You love me," he repeated. Not a coward." She lifted her chin. "Yes." Joy in those hazel eyes, and then his mouth was on hers. He kissed her with an intensity that immediately had her pulse skittering, her heart squeezing tight. Then, just as abruptly, pulled back. "Wait," he said, breath coming in rapid gusts. "Are you too drunk to consent to this?" She blinked. What?" "Baby." He smoothed back her hair. "Jamie said you were drinking. Are you too drunk to—" Her heart exploded. Well, not literally, of course, but for a moment she was frozen in place, unable to believe that she could feel this much for another person. The only caveat, the single thing that crept into that joy, that weighed down her happiness, was that he hadn't said it back. Maybe it was too soon, or maybe it was too much. Her gut clenched. That bliss was tempered by old insecurities. Maybe she was destined to be a woman, like her mother had always said, who would end up alone without a person to love her for who she was inside. Maybe she worked too much, was too difficult. Hell, maybe he'd come across her Twilight collection and had decided that was just a step too far, which would certainly put a damper on her feelings for this man. "I'm not too drunk," she whispered, tugging at his arm, now feeling sick instead of joyful. "You sure?" She nodded, her gaze fixed on a spot over his shoulder when he didn't release her. "What's the matter?" He was honestly asking her what was the matter? She'd blurted out a huge freaking revelation in front of almost everyone who is important to her, and he had hardly acknowledged she'd told him she loved him, aside from confirming she'd said it in the first place. Her eyes narrowed and she opened her mouth, then froze when she realized he was slowly and inexorably leading her toward— "Will you stop pushing me around?" she muttered, yanking at his arm. "No," he said. Then he spun her around. "What?" He pointed to a piece of paper in the middle of her command center, neatly written and held in place by 4 purple magnets, one on each corner. Her jaw fell open. "Is that what's the matter?" he whispered into her ear, making her shiver, making her melt back against him. Because that note, written in sure, firm strokes, said, "I love you." "How long has that been there?" she asked. He turned her in his arms, cupped her cheek. "Since last night." A shuddering breath. "Really?" He nodded. "You love me." Another nod. "Really?" His lips quirked up. "Really, really." "Are you sure?" Annoyance had those lips pressing flat, his eyes going serious. "Heidi," he warned. She nibbled at the corner of her mouth. "It's just that you haven't said it." She nodded at the note. "I mean, writing it isn't the same as saying it, is it?" He growled, swept her up in his arms. "I love you, Heidi Green. I love you so much that it feels like my heart will explode with happiness when I'm with you." He kissed her briefly, but intensely enough to have her pulse ratcheting up. Then he broke away, his expression gentle. "I love you with every bit of my soul, and I'll love you until that soul is no longer in my body." His forehead dropped to hers. "I never thought it was possible to feel this way for another person." She laughed. He frowned. "What is it?" Lifting her arms, she wrapped them around his neck. "It's only that I was just thinking the same. I don't know how you did it, honey, but somehow what I feel for you is more than I ever could have imagined." She slid a hand to his chest, placed it over his pounding heart. "And this, mine, it beats for you." He went still. "Heidi." "What?" "Fuck, I love you." She smiled, lifted up so her lips were just a hair's breadth from his. Guess what? Affection. No, love. So much fucking love in his eyes. What? He asked gently. I love you. He grinned. Also, closer now, so her lips brushed his with every word she spoke. The answer to your previous question of whether or not I'm sober enough to consent is, yes, baby, I am. Yeah? A nod. What about you? He frowned. Are you sober enough to consent to my attentions? What do you think? She blinked, realized he'd brought her to the bedroom, and then she smiled. I think, oof, he dropped her onto the mattress. I think, she said again, gasping as he came on top of her, all those glorious muscles pressing into her. You'll do fine. A wicked gleam in his eyes, his mouth coming down on top of hers. And then he showed her just how fine he could be. Chapter 23. Brad. He was just finishing up the last bit of design for the latest website when there was a knock on his apartment door. His eyes flicked to the clock on his computer screen, saw it was past 7, and blinked because shit, it was past 7. After quickly saving his work, a habit that had taken just one time of losing copious amounts of data to become ingrained in him, he stood and hurried to the door. Heidi was on the other side. Shit, Heidi, he said. Why didn't you call? I did call, she smiled, lightly poked his chest. But I think you pulled a me and turned off your phone. Closing the door behind her after she'd come in, he went to the counter and picked up his cell. It was on. He'd just been so engrossed in what he was doing that he hadn't heard it go off. Grimacing, he set it back down. I'm sorry, baby. I lost track of time. He snagged her hand, brought her close. Let me grab my shoes and then we can go meet your friends. Our friends. He smiled at that, then dropped a kiss to her forehead. Not sure if my brother can be considered a friend when he tries to order me around all the time. A well-placed nudge with her elbow. That ordering gene must be ingrained in the Huntington DNA, because you're sure good at it. He affected innocence. I don't know what you're talking about. She laughed, and just like every other time he saw her happy, he felt the jagged pieces settle inside him. He lived for that sound, for her joy, more than he'd ever thought possible. It had been a month since that night at her place, since she'd told him she loved him, and it had all been bliss. More hikes, though not pre-dawn, per her request. They'd gone to dinner, to the movies. He'd convinced her to do another touristy thing and take a ride on a cable car, which they'd both enjoyed much more than Alcatraz, him especially so, since she'd gotten cold on that foggy morning and had cuddled close to him as the rattling streetcar went up and down the hilly streets of San Francisco. Last week, they'd driven down to Santa Cruz and visited some absolutely huge redwoods in the morning, then had taken a very bumpy ride on an old wooden roller coaster in the afternoon. And just yesterday, Heidi had taken the day off from the lab, and they'd driven a few hours north to a tiny lighthouse perched above a beach filled with sea glass. And in between, they'd spent almost every night together, with the odd girls' night thrown in. On those evenings, he'd hung with Jamie, with Tanner, and occasionally with a few of Tanner's friends, Sebastian and Devin Scott. The brothers were cool guys, and the tech worker and former hockey player, respectively, had nicely rounded out the group when they'd brought Max Montgomery along one night. The current skater for the Gold was married to another one of Heidi's friends, Angie. It probably should have been overwhelming that he'd gone from spending so much time by himself to constantly being with people. But instead of too much, every time he opened up, every time he accepted another person into his life, he felt bigger. No, more complete, fulfilled, like he was finally fully part of the land of the living instead of alone. And that was fucking incredible. Even more incredible was that Heidi was just as happy as him. They'd gotten into the habit of mostly staying at her place. Frankly, it was nicer, but beyond that, it was also closer to her lab and both highways on which they often began their journeys. He didn't mind. He loved her place, loved seeing how proud she was of the life she'd built for herself. So on the weekdays, he'd work until she got off, then meet her there, and they'd cook dinner or order in. They'd spend the evening together watching TV. Yes, plenty of her reality shows, but he'd also managed to convince her to watch Vikings, which she liked for a completely different reason than he did, of course. He was in for the battles, the politics, the suspense. She liked all that, and the male lead. Though, if you were being completely truthful, when she'd woven Viking braids into her hair a few days ago, he'd certainly been able to see the appeal. So much so that they'd spent a very pleasurable evening on the faux fur rug she had in front of her fireplace. But more than just spending time together, no matter how pleasurable it was, he enjoyed finding all the different ways to take care of her. They could be small, from setting her coffee pot to brew so she'd have it first thing in the morning, to taking her trash out, to filling up her car with gas when she'd mentioned it was getting low. Or they could be larger, more time-intensive, like when he'd spent the better part of an afternoon under her kitchen sink because the garbage disposal had gone out. He understood now that these were all things he'd avoided like the plague when he'd spent the majority of his time traveling. The strings that would tie him more closely to another person, would make him vulnerable, would put him at risk of being hurt if they left or got sick or, God forbid, died. But he didn't feel scared with Heidi, because she was in just as deep, and because she took care of him in her own way. He'd found throw pillows on his couch the other day. They were in a manly, her words, not his, shade of burgundy that went perfectly with the fuzzy blanket she'd gotten for the foot of his bed. She'd had lunch delivered to his place when she'd known he'd been working on a particularly large project with a deadline looming, had texted him a link for hidden places to visit in California with, "Maybe we can go together." Then there were all the meals she'd cooked, finding out his favorite foods and incorporating them into the menu, stocking up on a certain brand of popcorn since it was his preferred variety, and how she'd cleared a drawer for him so he could leave some clothes at her place. In 2 months' time, he'd gone from feeling unfulfilled and a little lost to being happy. Such an inadequate word for all that was in his heart, but it was also the only one that mattered, because he was here and happy, and not searching for the next adventure that would bring him a slender thread of that elusive fulfillment for just a moment before that buzz faded and then he was off again, searching for the next thing, and the next, and the next. So yeah, he'd take happy, hands down. "I am sorry about not meeting you," he said, yanking himself out of his head and focusing on the important thing. That being this woman whom he loved to the edge of reason, who loved him back just as completely. She kissed him lightly on the mouth. "Don't apologize." A wink. "I've been known to get lost in my work every once in a while. You'll just have to owe me." Another wink. "Is there something in your eye?" he asked innocently. But she was old hat at his humor by now, so she just reached up and squeezed his cheeks, affecting a baby voice. "Aw, cute little Braddy just thinks he's so funny." "I know I'm funny." "You know what'll be really funny?" she asked, dropping her arms and stepping out of the circle of his. "What?" "Me leaving you here in your apartment with a rumbling tummy, while I go devour the most delicious Mexican food around." Right on cue, his stomach growled. "See?" she said, lifting a brow. "Hilarious." "Not so much," he kissed her, long and sweet and with every bit of affection he possessed for her. "I love you," he murmured when they'd pulled back. She blinked slightly glazed eyes, the hazel irises deepened to swirls of emerald and russet. Then her lips curved further. "I love you too. But seriously, I will leave your ass here unless you get it in gear." She pointed toward his closet. "Shoes and jacket on, because it is Friday night and it's past time for prickly pear margaritas." "It's going to be a tequila night?" He'd really enjoyed the last one. Really enjoyed it. In fact, he'd enjoyed it so much that his legs had been sore enough the following few days to make navigating curbs difficult, and steps, and lifting his foot enough to pull on his pants, and, well, it had been damned good. "Yes, it's going to be a tequila night for me. For you," she waggled her eyebrows, "only if you play your cards right." A beat. "Which means, go get your shoes on." It was amazing how quickly people could get dressed when they were motivated. Thankfully, the restaurant wasn't far from his apartment, and they managed to sneak into the table just as appetizers were being served. He pilfered some chips from his brother's plate and hadn't bothered perusing the menu. Instead, he ordered what Heidi did when the server came around to get their meals put in. Then he stole some more chips from Jamie. "Hey, little brother perks," he said chipperly. Jamie sighed but slid the nachos a little closer. "You're lucky this plate is huge." "Is that what you said to get Kate to marry you?" he deadpanned. Heidi giggled, attempting to cover said giggle with her napkin, then gave in, laughing loud enough for everyone at the table to look at her. "Don't mind me," she said, waving a hand in front of her face, still laughing. And fuck if that noise didn't fill him up, didn't make him feel like the biggest, baddest motherfucker on the planet. He should be swaggering around this restaurant, showing off his prowess. Or maybe that should have happened after the last tequila night, or maybe the Viking one, or last night, or... Suffice to say, he didn't think he'd ever get tired of making love to this woman who'd so easily captured his heart. "Stop smirking," Jamie socked him in the arm. Hard. "Ouch," he muttered, rubbing the injured limb. "What would Mom say?" Jamie snagged his plate back, smacking Brad's hand when he went to take another chip. "Probably that you deserved it." He shrugged, since that was probably true. "Speaking of Mom," Jamie said, still guarding his nachos. "They're driving up early. They'll actually be here tomorrow and want to do a family dinner with Kate's family." His eyes flicked past Brad, alighting on Heidi. "That includes you too," he said, "just in case you try to get out of the power of the moms." Brad shuddered. His mom and Kate's mom together were a formidable force. In contrast, Heidi smiled. "I love the moms." He groaned. "Pretty soon your mom will join the force, and then there will be 3 moms." "Heaven help us," Jamie said. "My mom would be a scary thought." He glanced at her, something in the undercurrent of her tone making alarm bells blare. Why? Her eyes did a thing. Precisely what thing was hard to decipher in the low light of the restaurant. He would have said she looked pained, but then it was gone so fast he chalked it up to a shadow, especially because when she spoke again, there was no undercurrent, just normal Heidi. "Only that she makes Kate's mom look like a kitten in comparison." She patted his arm. "You'd run away in fear." "I have to meet her at some point." Her finger, the nails short and unpolished, yet no less feminine, came to her lip, tapped the bottom one, twice. "But do you?" "I do." "Damn." A smile that was completely normal, without a weird eyeshadow thing and with absolutely no trace of an undercurrent. And here I was thinking of trying to keep you all to myself. He glanced around the table, the other occupants unabashedly watching him and Heidi make gooey eyes at each other, then back to his woman. And that's worked so well. Another tinkling laugh, and she leaned closer, waving a hand in their direction. "Ignore them," she said, pitched loud enough for the table to hear. "They mean nothing." "I resent that comment," from Cora. "Meh, I don't need your romance. I've got my own," courtesy of Kate. "Well, I, for one, am enjoying the banter. How do those two keep it up?" via Kels. "No idea. It's kind of sickening," added by Steph, who had her casted ankle propped up on a chair. "Actually," Heidi said on a shrug, "it's a gift." He leaned closer, whispered in her ear. "I thought we were supposed to be ignoring them." She wrinkled her nose. "Oh, right." Except she didn't say anything. Probably because, same as him, she'd been having so much fun bantering with him that she couldn't remember what they were supposed to be talking about. "What were we talking about?" he asked. Her eyes twinkled, voice dropping to a whisper. "I don't remember." Chuckling, he thought back, remembered. "Dinner tomorrow," he said, "with the frightening supervillains known as the Moms." Heidi linked her hand with his, stretched up, pressed a kiss to his cheek. "You're just still upset with them because you got in trouble about the wedding cake." "A man ruins one stupidly expensive cake and he never hears the end of it," he muttered. "Rightfully so," Kate chimed in from across the table, drawing them out from each other. I never even got to eat my lemon layer." She pressed the back of her hand to her forehead, adopted a mournful expression. "Oh, the humanity." "I did say I was sorry," he said, knowing she was joking but still feeling guilty about the entire scenario. "I'm just teasing," her face immediately gentled. "It wasn't your fault." "It was your cock's fault," Heidi said. And by said, he meant practically shouting it across the table, right when the restaurant had one of those periodic lulls in conversation, which meant that she shouted it across not just the table, but the entire restaurant too. Her cheeks flamed as conversations paused, stares turned to her, and then she just shrugged helplessly, setting down the margarita. "Whoops," she whispered. "I guess one margarita goes to your head when you don't eat all day." "You say that like there's ever been a time that one margarita hasn't gone to your head," Kate teased. "Fair point," she replied. Brad was more concerned about the fact that, "You haven't eaten all day?" Heidi winced, patted his shoulder. "Don't get all scowly." Her fingers brushed over his lips. "I was out of muffins, and Molly's was closed by the time we got back yesterday." A shrug. "I meant to stop for lunch, but I forgot. And then I drove to your place when you didn't meet me." Another lift and drop of her shoulders. "The day just ran away from me." He snagged Jamie's nachos, shoved them in front of her, ignoring his brother's "hey," and ordering her to eat now. She lifted a brow. "Remember what I said about orders?" He leaned in, whispered into her ear, his cock twitching when she shivered and shifted closer. "You said you only like my orders in bed." Her head turned, those green-brown eyes coming to his. "I do like them in bed." Bringing his lips to her ear again, he murmured, "We'll consider that off the table unless you eat the fucking nachos." For a moment, she melted against him, her shoulder resting against his chest. Then his words seemed to process because she straightened, eyes narrowing into a glare. "I ought to kick you out of my bed altogether." He leaned in, nipped at her bottom lip. "You'd miss me." "Ouch," she muttered, rubbing the lush curve of her mouth. "You like it," he countered. She made a face. "So what if I do? I still don't have to put up with your—" He lifted a chip crammed with meat and beans, salsa and sour cream, cheese and guacamole, and shoved it into her mouth. Her glare was back. But then it softened. She chewed, swallowed. "I fucking love you, even when you drive me insane." "I love you," Cora interrupted, drawing the focus of the table. "And yada yada yada. It's so predictable and lovely, and I'm insanely jealous." She threw her hands up. "Look, I'm happy for you fuckers, but I'm surrounded by gushiness on all sides here. Is it too much for me to ask you to give a single girl some relief around here and not to rub all your HEAs in my face?" Steph, the only other single girl at the table, nodded. "I second this motion." Kate opened her mouth, an apology in her expression, but Cora shushed her with a finger in her direction. "As I said, I am happy for you all, so no freaking apologies." A beat. "But can we just cool it with the soul-deep declarations? Just through the main course." Silence. Three couples' gazes meeting, guilt drifting between them. "I said no guilt." "Well, technically you said no apologies," Kelsey pointed out. "Ugh," Cora said. "Can the soul-deep declarations resume over dessert?" Kate asked innocently. More silence. Then, "Ugh," Cora and Steph said at the same time. But then the waiter came and began delivering entrees, and pretty soon the group was overtaken by the latest drama on the episode of 90 Day Fiancé, and Brad had such a good time hanging out with his woman and her friends, now his friends too, that he forgot all about the thing with Heidi's eyes, the undercurrent in her voice. Later he wished he'd remembered, wished he'd pushed to get to the bottom of it. If only he had, because so much would have turned out differently. Chapter 24. Heidi. She woke deliciously sore, but in the best possible way. Last night had been the tequila night to end all tequila nights. She, Kels, Cora, Steph, and Kate had decided to share a pitcher, and thus it put all other tequila nights to shame. And it made her look forward to finding other ways to top it, to make future tequila nights even better. She was going to need to start reading erotica in order to up her game. Brad had given her that hot, sleek smile of his when she told him that, kissing her in that long and slow way of his before he'd gotten up to bring her a coffee. And she knew he was looking forward to future tequila nights as much as she was. He'd brought her a steaming mug, 2 sugars, and a heavy splash of cream, before ordering her to stay in bed. Probably she should have protested, should have gotten up and helped him. But she was being lazy, and she was tired and cozied up with her back propped up by pillows, her coffee in hand, and he'd offered to cook for her. So she was lounging in bed and enjoying his care. But she was also making a mental note to return that care, because he deserved to have this same warm, fuzzy feeling. In the meantime, she thought, setting her coffee down and burrowing deeper into the blankets, she was going to enjoy the break. Now, if only she didn't need to have her arms out from beneath the comforter to hold her book. Tough life, she knew. Sometime later, 4 chapters later, Brad appeared in the doorway, shirtless, with a streak of flour across his chest, a plate laden with goodies in his hands. "Where's yours?" she asked. He smiled, crawled into bed next to her, balancing the plate of pancakes, eggs, and bacon in one hand. "Here." She pressed her lips together. "So where's mine?" Another smile, his body pressing against hers. "Here." Now she saw how this was going to work. He settled the plate on his lap, scooped up a bit of pancake onto the fork, and lifted it up to her lips. Right as a knock came on the door. They both paused. Then he shrugged. "Ignore it." Dutifully, she parted her lips, ate the bite he'd offered her. The knock came again, trailed by the buzz of her phone. "This is the continue ignoring part," he said. Another knock, more buzzing. He sighed, set the plate on the nightstand. "You get the phone, I'll get the door." She made a face but dutifully reached for her cell, snagging it from the charging cradle, at the same time her glorious, and still shirtless man, headed to the door. "Hello?" she asked. "It's me." Kate's voice came on the line, and it was impossible to miss the panic. "Please tell me you're staying at Brad's place." She frowned. "No, we're at mine." "Shit, listen, you need to know that you're—" There was a movement in the doorway, drawing her gaze up, and horror dawned. "Mom is in town." Her cell dropped to the mattress. 15 minutes later, she and Brad were both fully dressed. Her phone was back in the charging stand, and she was seated at the kitchen table while Brad redistributed the contents of the 2-for-1 plate into, 2 plates, and then made up one more. For her mother, who was wiping a finger across the wooden surface of Heidi's table. Colleen grimaced and reached into the handbag she hadn't yet put down, extracting a package of wet wipes, then cleaning the area in front of her. Then the back of the chair, and the seat, and the fork and knife Brad had placed on a napkin for her before serving up breakfast. Brad, who turned from the counter, 2 plates in hand, was watching the exercise with raised brows. Brows he then turned onto her. And all she could do was shrug helplessly. This was her mother. The light version of her mother. Because more of her mother's motherness would come. "I believe I bought you placemats, dear," she said. Ugly-ass ones with puke green flowers and red trim, like the most unattractive version of Christmas someone could imagine. "Ah, yes," she cleared her throat. "I only use them for very special occasions." Brad set a plate in front of her mom, rounded the table to set one in front of Heidi, pressing a kiss to the side of her neck. She smiled up at him. "Thanks," she murmured. He brushed his fingers over her cheek. "You're welcome." Then he returned for his own and sat down next to her. Heidi didn't bother saying anything. Her mother wouldn't trouble herself to listen to anything she had to say that wasn't what she wanted to hear, so the best tactic was to wait for her to start the conversation. "Breakfast this late in the day?" "Ah, cool. She was going to start off with a bang." "Yep," Heidi said, feeling Brad's gaze on her face. She glanced at him out of the corner of her eye, saw his features drawn in confusion. He cleared his throat. Heidi and I had a late night. And I have to say I'm a big fan of breakfast, no matter the time of day, he added. I see. Except she answered it like she always said something that wasn't what she wanted to hear, like someone was suggesting they go out and slaughter unicorns. Heidi continued to ignore her, glancing at Brad as she shoveled in food. Thank you, she said between bites. This is delicious. He rested his palm on her thigh. You're welcome. You cooked? His gaze went from Heidi to her mother. Heidi has been working really hard, he said. I figured she could use a break. A sniff. Working. More unicorn slaughtering. And she knew that she had to take this in hand. Yes, Mom, working. I'm still at the lab, and I love it. And does Brad love it? Her throat seized, but before she could summon a reply, he answered, I enjoy spending whatever time with her I can. And yes, I love that she has a job that fulfills her. Stink face. That was the only way she could think to describe her mother's expression. Mom, she began, what do you do? Brad was nonplussed by the sharp question. I'm a web designer. And can you make a living at that? He chuckled. I've been making a living at it for close to 10 years now. Ah. Cue silence. Why'd you decide to come into town, Mom? She asked into that tense quiet. Your father had a conference. And neither of them had decided to tell her. Right. Her dad, she could understand. Keeping track of a schedule wasn't his strong suit. But her mother, she was organized. She knew what was coming. She just expected Heidi to always drop everything and be available. Oh, that's great, Brad said. I'd love to meet him. Are you two free later? My family's in town and we're having a big dinner with my brother's wife's family. Actually, I'm sure you guys probably already know Kate's parents, huh? He glanced at Heidi. Since you guys have known each other since college. Heidi shrugged. Yes, her parents had met Kate, and it had gone, well, about as well as a nuclear explosion. Kate's parents were nice, which wasn't a fair assessment to her dad, she knew. He was a decent person, if not a bit detached from anything that wasn't the science in his brain. It was just that her mom was her mom. Actually, she began. Meanwhile, Brad was still talking. It's always a good time, and I'm sure they'd love to have you. Her mother daintily picked up a fork, cut off a truly minuscule bite of pancake, and ate it, then shuddered. For fuck's sake. If you're available and... I'm sure they're busy, Heidi blurted. My father's conference schedule's always hectic, and he's usually tired after... Kate McLeod? Brad smiled. She's a Huntington now, but yes, she was a McLeod. Her mom's eyes widened, hunger inside them. The very same hangers-on hunger she'd had the first time she'd met Kate's parents. The same hunger that had Heidi promising herself she would never, ever bring their two families into contact again. They're busy, she said quickly. Actually, her mom said, no, we're not. We'd love to come. She tried another way. It's impolite to add guests. It's fine, sweetheart, he said. My mom is always happy to welcome more, and I know Kate's mom feels the same. Because, of course they did. Because the moms were both wonderful. Unlike hers. Great, her mother said. Then it's settled. Your father and I will join in on the dinner. Chapter 25. Brad. He'd fucked up. He'd realized that after Heidi's mom, Colleen, had left to go get ready, and he'd finally seen Heidi's face. He'd known it when her parents had shown up in the rental car, her dad in jeans and a polo that would fit right in with the Huntingtons and McLeods, and her mother in a cocktail dress, with pearls. She looked beautiful. She just didn't look like she was ready to go to a casual, family-style dinner. Fancy 8-course meal? Yes. Barbecue chicken on paper plates? No. But he hadn't realized exactly how much he'd fucked up until dinner. when Colleen had latched onto Kate's mom, Maribel, like a limpet, asking her all about her cosmetic business and how much money she'd made, and then approaching practically every item in the large ranch-style house and expounding on how expensive the built-in cabinet must be and, oh look, that TV was huge, it must be super pricey, and what about the outdoor kitchen? That surely must have cost an arm and a leg, especially with that glass tile backsplash. It wasn't so much that she was complimenting Maribel's style choices. It was just also insincere, over the top, disingenuous. But that still wasn't the moment when he'd realized the extent of his fucked upness. Nope, that came from the way she'd treated Heidi, the way she was still treating Heidi. And look, his own mom had taught him to treat people with kindness and respect, but she'd also taught him to stand up to bullies. Colleen was a bully. He didn't know why she was a bully, but he just knew that she must have been that way for a long time, long enough that Frank, her scientist husband, and Heidi hardly seemed to notice the barely veiled barbs, the disapproving looks. But as the wine flowed and the dinner went on, the barbs became more obvious, and the hold on his temper grew decidedly tenuous. "Tell me what you're working on in your lab," Maribel said, then chuckled. "Well, tell me whatever you can that's not top secret, that is." She glanced over at Colleen. "Isn't it amazing that your daughter runs her own lab? I heard her last paper was peer-reviewed in the journal." For the first time, he saw Frank perk up, lifting his head from his plate of chocolate cake and reaching across the table to pat his daughter's hand. "It was a fantastic article." "But she's still over 30 and unmarried." All eyes at the table turned to Colleen, then went back to Heidi, who was gorgeous in an emerald blouse, loose-fitting jeans, and minimal makeup that didn't hide the red stain on her cheeks. "Lucky for me, there's more to life than wedding bells." She smiled at Kate. "No offense to my newly married friends." Kate smiled sympathetically. "None taken. God knows I spent plenty of time being over 30 and unmarried." "Except, enough, Mom," Heidi said. Colleen's jaw tightened. "Well, even if you don't care enough to give me grandchildren, the least you could do is go easy on the sugar and carbs so you can fit into a nice wedding dress," she sniffed. "That is, if you can even get Brad down the aisle." Kate gasped. Heidi's eyes slid closed. And he lost it. He slammed his hands on the table as he shot to his feet, his chair tipping over backward and hitting the floor with a loud thwack. "Where in the hell do you get off treating your daughter that way?" Primly, she turned in his direction. "Excuse me?" she asked archly. "No, you're not excused," he snapped. "Your behavior is atrocious. Your daughter is the most wonderful woman I have ever met, and I'm lucky enough to love her. And yet you treat her like she's not worthy." He slammed his hands on the table again, making several people jump. "You don't fucking deserve to breathe her air." How dare I?" He stepped back from the table, straightened his chair. "Is that what you were going to say? How dare I stick up for your daughter? How dare I love her? How dare I be so fucking proud of her for doing something she is incredible at, something she enjoys?" "I don't care if she plays at the lab," Colleen said with a sniff. "She still doesn't have the important things. Plus, she hardly ever sees us." "I wonder why," he growled. "With a mother like you, it's a wonder she even let you walk through her door this morning. Oh, wait, I was the one who let you in." A beat as gasps surrounded the table. "Your daughter likely would have used that big, juicy brain of hers to slam the door in your face." "That's enough." His own mother's voice was probably the only thing that could have stopped him in that instance. He glanced over at her, vision tinged red with fury. She cupped his cheek. "Honey, that's enough." Forcing himself to take a deep breath, he nodded, sat back down. "What manners," Colleen huffed. "Colleen," Frank warned. She ignored him, her chin lifting somewhere in the level of the atmosphere. "I've never had anyone speak to me in such a way," she said. "Maybe I don't want such a man to date my daughter." "Enough, Mom," Heidi said. "The rudeness is just inexplicable. I've never said a crossword to anyone, and—" A muscle in his mom's jaw twitched, but she merely glanced over at Maribel, who nodded. "I think it's time to leave," his mom said. "Yes," Colleen placed her napkin on the table. "It's getting late. This dinner should have ended long ago." "No," Maribel said, standing up and striding into the hall where she opened the front door. "What I mean is that you should go, and the rest of us will enjoy our evening." Colleen froze in the middle of collecting her purse. "Excuse me?" "You heard me fine," Maribel said. "I won't tell you not to come back because I'm not the kind of person who closes doors on other people. Hence the reason you're back here in my house, despite the rudeness you showed the last time you visited." She crossed her arms. "However, I will tell you that as of this moment, you certainly will not be welcomed back in this house unless you're prepared to treat everyone with respect and understanding, including your lovely, wonderful daughter." Heidi blinked rapidly, her gaze falling to the table. "Mom," she said, "please just go." Brad took her hand. She pulled away, held them tightly in her lap. "Well, I never." Frank seemed to finally grow a pair. "Colleen," he snapped, "that is more than enough." She whirled on him, glaring darkly. "Don't you dare." He stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor. "Don't you see that you're embarrassing yourself? That you're embarrassing your daughter?" His shoulders straightened. "And me. You're embarrassing me." A beat, his eyes so similar to Heidi's, skimmed the table. "You need to apologize to everyone." Colleen crossed her arms and glared at the ceiling. Frank sighed, pushed in the chair, and kissed Heidi, whose expression had turned bleak, her eyes reddened, her skin dull and pale, on the cheek. "My apologies for my wife's inexcusable rudeness," he said to the table, and grabbed their 2 jackets from the hook, draping them over one arm before his eyes went to Maribel's. "I hope that if we are ever given the honor of an invitation to your wonderful home again, that my wife will find her manners. Either that or you can feel free to leave her off the invite." Colleen bristled. "How? He said, speaking loud enough to drown out Colleen. "On the other hand, cannot thank you enough for the care you've shown my daughter." His gaze went to Heidi, who had dropped her eyes to her folded hands. "Thank you for giving that to her." His voice dropped. "She deserves it, and so much more. She deserves all the happiness in the world." A squeeze to her shoulder before he cleared his throat, his volume increasing, forced cheerfulness in his tone. "We'll let you folks get on with your night. I'm sure you'll have a much better time without us." With that, he snagged Colleen's arm and dragged the still sputtering woman out the front door. A heartbeat later, Maribel slammed it behind them, then locked it, rubbing her hands together. "I meant it when I said I don't normally close doors on people." She rolled her head from side to side. "But damn, did that feel good." She laughed, and the room joined in. But not the whole room, because his ears prickled, realizing that someone's laugh had been missing. Not someone's, Heidi's, because she was gone. Chapter 26. Heidi. She was hiding in the darkened shadows of Kate's parents' backyard and wondering if she could dig a hole deep enough to hide in when Brad found her. Hands around her waist, a firm chest at her spine, just holding her silently for long moments. "I'm sorry," she whispered when she could speak without sobbing. "For what?" A startled laugh as she spun in his arms. "For what?" she asked. "For what?" She shook her head. She was being awful, doing the same stuff she always does, and I couldn't break that fucking cycle. I just sat there like a fucking lump, taking it. She pushed away from him, then stalked away. I just let her treat me like shit. "First," he said, coming up behind her and snagging her hand. "It was damned hard trying to get a word in edgewise with a woman." He tugged her toward him. "Second, sometimes it's not the easiest telling people you love that they're out of line." He smoothed back her hair. "Third, I repeat, there was not a lot of room in that conversation for more words, even though I do seem to remember you telling her to stop." "She didn't listen, though, did she?" "Does she listen to anyone?" He had a point there. "No, but God, she was so fucking embarrassed. And that scene was just one of those special moments her mother excelled at creating and then adding in the rest of her behavior. It was right up there with the nuclear explosion of her parents' first meeting with Kate's mom and dad. Only this time she'd managed to squeeze out a few more words. Barely. "Baby," he whispered, "no one is upset at you." She knew that. Well, she supposed she knew that, but how could they not be mad at her? It was her mom that had ruined the fun night. Her mom who'd said all the rude things. It was absolutely despicable the way her mother had acted. "I had to battle Kate and both of our mothers for the privilege to make sure you're okay." She winced. They should just get on with their meal. "We should get on with our dessert before my dad gorges himself on the rest of the chocolate cake." She smiled, thinking it had definitely been gorge-worthy, or at least the one bite of it she'd managed to eat had been absolutely delicious before her mom had gone on her tear. "Plus, when everyone is done, we're going to play Ticket to Ride." He laughed. "And I should warn you, my mom has been practicing since Maribel destroyed her so incredibly badly last time." Somehow, despite the scene in the dining room, this man still made her laugh. "There it is," he whispered. "There's what?" "The laugh that makes my heart fill with joy." He cupped the side of her neck, drew her against him once again. "Baby, no one cares that your mom is the worst, and certainly not the moms. They've decided to make you an official Huntington MacLeod adopted daughter, and their pledge is to ensure that you understand your, quote, beautiful, smart, and beyond wonderful. All of which are true, by the way." His thumb brushed across her cheek, and she realized she was crying. "I'd also add strong, sexy as shit with Viking braids, and so fucking funny that you give my banter skills a run for the money." "Brad," she whispered. "So, good luck dealing with the pair of them," he said. "In fact, I heard Maribel plotting with my mom that they were going to wrap you up in so much love you would never be able to escape." She sighed. "They really are quite wonderful." "You say that now," he teased, then loosened his hold, lacing their fingers together and drawing her toward the house. "Come on, let's go cheat by working together so neither of our moms can get the most successful railroad." "Wait." He stopped. "What, baby?" "Are you sure no one is mad?" Her teeth found her bottom lip, nibbled lightly. "I ruined their night, and—" He kissed her gently and filled with so much love and tender affection that she felt her heart melt. "I can absolutely promise you that no one is mad." He paused. "Well, no one currently allowed in Maribel's house. Your mom, on the other hand." She tugged her hand free, covered her face, groaning. "I hate that I didn't stand up for myself." He came close again, rubbed his hand up and down her back. "You know what the great part about being in a relationship is?" Her shoulders relaxed the slightest bit. "Besides the copious amount of orgasms?" A smile. "Yes, besides those." "I don't know," she said. "What?" "That you don't have to fight all of your battles alone." "Look at you sounding all logical." She wrinkled her nose. "Of course, I know you're right, and I do thank you for standing up for me. Knowing that you'd go to bat for me, even in an uncomfortable situation, it makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside." "Does that mean you love me even more?" She made a face. "Not that your ego needs it, but yes, you saying those things, sticking up for me. Yes, I love you even more." The breeze picked up, rustling through her hair, making her shiver. "You're cold." He bundled her against his warm chest, wrapping his arms tightly around her. "Let's go inside." She let him lead her toward the house. "I just wish I could have said—" She trailed off, realization finally dawning on her, making her go still in his arms, her brain putting the puzzle pieces together. "What, baby?" he prompted. "It wouldn't have mattered what I said, would it?" He just stroked a hand down her spine, let her continue to think about that. After a moment, she shook her head. "No," she murmured. "I don't think it would have." Brad loved her. He had her back, and further that her dad, who normally was so deep in his own head, had recognized she needed that too, needed someone to build her up rather than tear her down. She supposed that her mom also loved her, at least in some unhealthy way, a way that made it so she would never turn down an opportunity to make Heidi feel small. But that didn't have anything to do with her. Did that suck? Hell yeah. Did that make a part of her feel like shit? Hell fucking yeah. But could she truly do anything to change her mother's behavior? No. Nothing she did would ever make her mom change. So she could only alter her reaction, adjust her expectations. Heidi could work on extracting herself from the situations, make sure she didn't allow herself to be waylaid into scenarios she didn't want to participate in. She could keep her distance from her mom, only allow the interactions she was comfortable with. And she could continue surrounding herself with people who loved her for who she was, who didn't see her as a failure, who instead saw her flaws and loved her all the more for them. Heidi. She stopped and stared up at him. I love you. His face softened. I love you. Fingers on her cheek. I'll love you until... Come on already, Jamie shouted from the door. Just kiss her until she gets all dopey and forgets what happened. Then we'll convince her we don't care what happened. Unless, of course, she beats me in Ticket to Ride, Maribel called. Then all bets are off. Heidi had frozen at the sound of Jamie's voice. The addition of Maribel's made her smile. Brad smoothed back her hair. I guess I'd better listen to him. What? But she didn't get to finish the question because his lips were on hers, and then he was kissing her until she was loopy, until her heart pounded and her pulse was skittering through her veins. Then he took her inside to play a board game, as though it were a normal night and not one where her heart had seemed to grow 3 sizes. Hey, Jamie said as they started to walk past him. She glanced up, but he was looking at Brad, smiling in that paternalistic, older brother way he just exuded. For the record, Mom just told me she's not going to worry about you anymore. Brad went still, so still. Then his body relaxed, a long sigh escaping him, and he clapped Jamie on the shoulder. Love you, bro. Love you too, Jamie nodded, and after Kate popped her head into the hall, he hustled into the dining room. What was that about? Heidi whispered as they followed him. He slowed down, tugging her to a halt with him. That Ticket to Ride, Maribel called from the dining room. His lips curved up into that special, slow, sexy smile that he reserved only for her. I'll tell you, now! Lips on hers for the briefest moment. Some other time. Heidi's heart grew another size. Sometime in our long, happy future together. Another smile, this one hot, tinged with sweet. Yes. Maribel's head poked in through the opening. Ticket to Ride, they finished in unison. And then they went into the kitchen to finally play that board game. On a night that felt extraordinary, but would become commonplace as the years went by, her heart growing and growing until it seemed to take up all the space in her body. But that wasn't scary any longer. All the love she felt for them made her stronger instead of weaker, built her up instead of tore her down. Because she had her family, the one she'd made, the one she'd chosen. And she had this man who'd turned normal into extraordinary. Epilogue. Brad, 6 months later. Pink painted nails digging into pale white sand. A lusciously curved body curled up next to his. A paperback propped up on his chest as she read her latest historical romance. It was funny, but in all his travels, he had never been one for sitting on a beach all day, having cocktails delivered at his elbow, the hot sun shining down through an umbrella overhead. But with Heidi at his side like this, he was hard-pressed to picture another type of vacation. Of course, it might also be the sex. He could now say with complete authority that he didn't mind getting sand into all sorts of crevices when it meant that he could be with this woman. Tomorrow they would be going back home to the Bay Area, to Heidi's condo with his newly finished and exceptionally organized, thanks to his woman, office, and they'd be heading back to reality. Except reality was heaven. So they might be leaving the gorgeous beach and warm sand. They wouldn't have cocktails delivered to their cabana, left at their sides by friendly attendants. They'd be back in the fog, in the traffic, in the long hours at the lab and long hours behind a computer. But they'd also be going back to movie nights and popcorn, to coffee while cuddled up in bed, and blustery trips to the beach. They'd be going back to the life they'd built. The huge, wonderful, amazing life they'd built. Only, Heidi didn't know it, but she would be going back with one additional souvenir. The diamond ring currently taking up space in his pocket because he hadn't been able to let it out of his sight. He had it planned for dinner. He'd made all the arrangements. A moonlight stroll on the beach, a private dinner at a table perched just above the waves. They'd have the stars and the moon, and then he'd get down on one knee and... I was thinking. Blinking, he glanced down at her, at the woman who held his heart in the palm of her hand, who was so fucking strong and smart and beautiful, and smiled. About what? She set her book down, shifted so she could rest her chin on her folded arms that sat on his chest. Then she smiled. And damn if his heart still didn't skip a beat. Uh-oh, he teased. That's a very calculating look. What am I about to get myself into? A splash of pink on her cheeks. I was thinking. He smirked. You said that already. Thinking about what? Well, our flight home connects through Vegas, she said. So I thought we could extend our trip for one more day and... Go gambling? She sighed, narrowed her eyes at him. Brad, she warned. What? He asked innocently. She huffed. We could do the most Vegas-y thing ever and take a page out of Kelsey Tanner's book. And then he decided to forget the dinner, forget the moonlight and crashing waves and proposal under the stars. Placing a finger over her lips, he used his other hand to reach into his pocket. He didn't skip the one knee, which required him to do a fair amount of maneuvering, he had to admit. But then she was sitting up and he was on one knee, and he had the ring box open. Heidi, my love, my heart, my everything. Yes! Laughter bubbled up in his chest. I haven't even asked you yet. You don't have to. She launched herself into his arms, making him fumble to grab her, hold on to the ring, and not end up on his ass. He was only successful in 2 of the 3, but since they were the most important 2, he didn't mind the sand getting up his swim trunks. Especially when she said, The answer to any question you ask me will always be yes. Any? He asked, tugging at a strand of her hair. Are you sure you want to commit to that? A glare. Stop teasing and kiss me. In a minute, he said, then looked deeply into those beautiful hazel eyes and asked her the most important question of his life. Heidi Green, will you marry me? Her expression gentled. Yes, baby, I will. A beat, her lips curving. Now will you kiss me already? He smiled, cupped her cheek. One more thing first. A mock-annoyed huff. Then a smile when he slipped the ring on her finger. And then he kissed her. So, Vegas? She asked when they broke for air, breath coming in rapid bursts. Want to hit up a chapel with me? He wanted nothing more. But, don't you want to have a big wedding with the giant dress and the bridesmaids and the hundreds of guests? She shuddered. No, I just want you. What about your friends? He asked, wanting to marry her more than anything, but also wanting to make sure she had everything she had ever dreamed of. Don't you want them to be part of your wedding? Fingers on his jaw, her mouth very close to his. Honey, she said, I never fantasized about having a big wedding with the white puffy dress and the bouquet and the multi-tiered wedding cake. A smile he could practically taste, her lips were so near. That can be knocked over by an errant groomsman. It was the fuzz. A brush of her mouth across his. Sure it was. Another. But Cox aside, she grinned, and he snorted. What I'm trying to tell you is that all I've ever dreamed of is finding a person who loves me for who I am. Someone who I'm not afraid to let close because they would see my flaws and understand that they are just another piece of me to appreciate. She straightened, her eyes growing damp. And you're that person. You're the one who's made me see that I was worthy of all that, and so much more. You're the one who gave me more than I could ever imagine, so... She cupped his jaw. Know that I love you, honey, and I want to marry you so fucking much. In fact, the only thing I want to do slightly more is to make babies with you. His heart, it squeezed tight, so much emotion coiling in his stomach that it took his breath away. You want babies? She nodded. Thud, 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 thud. He stood, tugging her to her feet. What's the matter? She asked as he started dragging her across the sand. Brad! He turned back, swept her into his arms. We need to get started. Packing? A slow shake of his head. No, sweetheart. On the babies. She laughed, wrapped her arms around him. That sounds like the best idea you've ever had. He waggled his brows. The best? She kissed him. Then he got to work on that best idea.